Hi everyone, welcome to another video on Paranormal M. I hope you're doing okay tonight. Some people have told me these stories help them fall asleep, so feel free to share them with anyone who might need something quiet to listen to at night. And if you enjoy the video, please leave a like. Our first story is from someone who had a strange experience while working as a letter carrier, when time seemed to shift and someone familiar appeared in an unexpected place. Get comfortable. Take it easy, and I hope you all sleep well tonight. I want to tell you about something that happened a few years ago, because it still drifts back into my mind sometimes. Back then, I was working as a mail carrier. Not for very long, honestly. It was one of those jobs I thought I could handle, but my body had other opinions. I was getting a little too worn around the edges for all that walking, lifting, and pushing through the day no matter what. This was in the United States, in a downtown area where I was delivering mail. I had moved a long, long way from the place where I'd known this one friend of mine, thousands of miles away. So realistically, there was almost no reason he should have been there. Not impossible, of course, just very unlikely. Now, sometimes I get these moments where time feels wrong. Not stopped exactly, but stretched. The world slows down at the edges. Little details sharpen all at once, the way they do in a movie when a character suddenly notices everything around them. It can feel peaceful for half a second, then strange, then almost too strange. That day, while I was walking my route, I started noticing people on the street who looked like my old friend. Not just one person, several. At first, I thought maybe I was just tired, or maybe the city had a lot of people with similar features. I even wondered whether his family might have roots there somehow, some shared look that kept showing up in passing faces. Then I saw someone who looked almost exactly like him. The only differences were that this person had long blonde hair tied back, a bandana, and sunglasses. But the face, the build, the way he moved, it all tugged at something in me. And the thing is, I've known people who prefer to stay unnoticed, people who keep their lives quiet for reasons of their own. So the idea that my friend might be trying not to be recognized did not feel completely impossible. I noticed him, and then he noticed me noticing him. That was the part that made my stomach tighten a little. He turned around and came toward me from behind. I didn't say anything at first. I'm also the kind of person who tends to keep a low profile, and if it really was him, asking directly would have revealed me too. Besides, I looked different than I had back when we knew each other. Maybe different enough that he wouldn't have recognized me right away. Then he spoke. His voice was not quite right. It was higher than my friend's voice, lighter somehow. But even then I thought, well, a person could change their voice if they wanted to. He asked if I knew where a certain street was. I told him I was new to the area and didn't know. That was true. Then we went our separate ways. After he left, the feeling didn't disappear right away. Time stayed stretched and strange for several more minutes, like the air had been pulled thin. Eventually, everything settled back into its normal rhythm. I still don't know what to make of it. My friend was older than me, though he had always seemed healthy. He was also the kind of person who lived quietly, using burner phones and keeping himself hard to track. I know that might sound odd, but people do live that way. So I don't really have a way to check whether he's still around, or whether he knew anything about that moment, assuming it was him at all. And yes, I understand the obvious explanation. Maybe it was just my perception playing tricks on me. Maybe I was tired. Maybe my mind connected dots that weren't actually connected. That's possible, and I can accept that. But the experience didn't feel ordinary. It felt like walking through a moment that had been folded wrong. I don't know how many people experience time distortions like that. For a long time, I thought I was nearly alone in having strange things happen, because people don't usually talk about them. When they do, they often get treated like they're unstable or making things up. So maybe these experiences are rare, Or maybe more people have them than we realize, and they've just learned to keep quiet. Today, I want to tell you about one of the strangest coincidences I've ever experienced, because honestly, it still gives me chills when I think about it. So, last night, I had this incredibly vivid dream. Not the kind of dream where everything feels blurry and random, but the kind where every detail feels strangely sharp. In the dream, there was this enormous crimson building. It wasn't especially tall, maybe only a few floors high, but it stretched so far sideways that it almost felt impossible. It stood alone in this wide, empty field, and the only other building nearby was the apartment I was living in. The whole place felt deserted and unsettling. Just open land, silence, and these two lonely buildings sitting there like they didn't belong anywhere. Then, out of nowhere, a girl came running from behind the red building. And because the building was so ridiculously long, it took her forever to reach us. We could see her from far away, just running and running across that empty space. When she finally got close, she looked at us and said, "Look at the window." So we looked. There was a window on maybe the 4th floor, maybe the 5th, and sitting right on the edge of it were two little girls, their legs dangling outside like it was nothing. They were playing some kind of hand game, almost like rock, paper, scissors, completely calm. But then, they stood up on the window ledge, and they started jumping around, playing these dangerous little games right there on the edge. I remember feeling this awful tightness in my chest, because it looked like they were going to fall at any second. Then, suddenly, 3 more girls appeared beside them. Now there were 5 of them. All 5 started playing on that ledge together, laughing and jumping like they had no idea how dangerous it was. More people began gathering around me, all of us staring up at them, completely frozen. And then, all 5 girls held hands and jumped. They hit the ground hard. Everyone rushed toward them, but when we got close, we realized something was wrong. They looked human from a distance, but up close, they weren't really human at all. Their bodies seemed artificial somehow. I could see bones, and the bones looked real, but their flesh was strange, almost jelly-like. There was no blood, not a single drop. After that, I went back to my apartment. I remember trying to do something simple, but I kept messing it up again and again, like something was interfering with me. Then somehow, my sister realized I was being haunted, and I could see it too. Not clearly, but like a dark shadow nearby. The ghost's name was Gracie. That part really stayed with me, because that name is not common around me at all. I'm from India, and I've never personally known anyone with that name. I haven't even heard it much in the movies or shows I usually watch. In the dream, my sister and I tried to play something religious on my phone, something protective, but no matter where we searched, YouTube, apps, anywhere, we couldn't find what we needed. We kept searching, and then suddenly I remembered, wait, I can recite it myself. So I started reciting it out loud, and right after that, I woke up. It was around 3 or 4 in the morning. Now here's the part that really disturbed me. Later that morning, I went to work. I'm still in training, so I've been spending time working in stores. For a while, there were no customers at all. The place was quiet. Then the first customer of the day walked in, and her name was Gracie. That was the first time in my entire life I had ever met someone with that name. Maybe it was just a coincidence. It probably was. But after having that dream only a few hours earlier, hearing that name in real life felt deeply unsettling. Like the dream had left a small crack open, and something from it had quietly stepped through. not totally sure whether I'm asking for advice or just trying to make sense of everything. But this has been weighing on me, and it's really about someone close to me. A friend of mine lost her dad a few weeks ago after a painful fight with cancer. For privacy, I'll call him Granddad. I'll call my friend Lily, and I'll call her little boy Milo. Lily has dogs, and one thing that feels important is that none of the dogs have been acting strange. Nothing about their behavior has really changed. Most of what's been happening seems to center around Milo. Granddad's illness moved fast. He was diagnosed sometime last year, and earlier this year the family was told it was terminal. After that, he declined pretty quickly. He spent time going in and out of the hospital, but in the end, he was able to come home on hospice. He passed there, surrounded by the people who loved him. The night before he died, Lily and Milo were at his house. He had that sudden burst of energy people sometimes get near the end, and for a little while, it felt like a good day. But later that evening, he became really unsettled. At one point, he started crying out, "Help me!" again and again. Lily decided it was best to take Milo home. She didn't want her dad to become more distressed, and she didn't want Milo to see too much of what was happening. But as they were leaving, Milo said he saw a figure. He described it as someone who had been hit by a car, and he said it told him, "Someone is going to die here." He said it followed them for a while. It even gave him a name. Milo said it looked human, but it was dressed all in dark clothes. I was actually on the phone with Lily when Milo saw it, so I heard some of this unfold in real time. The next day, Granddad passed away. That same day, Lily's front door opened on its own. It has a coded deadbolt, so that really unsettled her. A couple of days later, Lily heard someone call her name. Around the same time, she smelled cigarette smoke. Granddad had smoked for years, right up until his cancer diagnosis. Then another night, Lily heard a loud crash. When she went to check, Milo's toy organizer had been completely emptied. The bins were dumped and scattered everywhere. The dogs weren't loose in the house. Milo had been asleep in Lily and her husband's bed, and everyone else had been in bed too. A few days ago, Milo came up to Lily and said, "Someone just rubbed my back. It was Granddad." He told me the same thing the next day, completely unprompted. But in that same conversation, he didn't remember the figure from the night before Granddad died at all. He didn't remember seeing someone get hit by a car. He didn't remember the warning about someone dying there. It was like that part had disappeared from his mind. Then, 2 nights ago, Granddad's wife said she saw him standing in her doorway. That was the only experience she's had, so maybe it could have been grief or exhaustion. I don't know. But with everything else going on, it's hard not to wonder. And then tonight, Milo was in the living room while Lily was in the bedroom. She called for him to come in with her, and he said, "I'm staying in here because Granddad's with me. I'll be okay." That really scared Lily, because when she went to check on him, he was just sitting calmly on the couch, playing on his tablet. That might sound normal, but for Milo, it really isn't. He's usually very attached to Lily and doesn't like being in a separate room from her. My worry is that the figure Milo saw may have been some kind of death presence, maybe something connected to Granddad's passing. And I keep wondering whether, with everything so raw and open around that time, something either negative or not fully understood may have attached itself to Milo. Or maybe it really is Granddad, staying close because he loved him so much. Granddad was deeply attached to Milo, and Milo was very close to him too. He was also very close to Lily. I know people say children can be more sensitive to things adults don't pick up on, and Lily has had experiences before, but in this house, she doesn't really feel or see much herself. That's part of what worries her. She's afraid something might be pretending to be Granddad so it can get close to Milo. I guess I'm just trying to understand whether that sounds possible or whether I'm reading too much into it. I don't want to scare anyone more than they already are, but I also don't want to ignore something if it's worth paying attention to. I honestly still don't know how to explain this. And even now, thinking back on it gives me that uneasy feeling in my chest. This happened about 3 years ago, on a completely ordinary night. Nothing felt strange. I wasn't sick, I wasn't upset, I wasn't drinking, nothing like that. I just got ready for bed like I always did. My routine back then was the same every night. I'd plug my phone in, set it on the little shelf beside my bed, and go to sleep. I had done that for years without even thinking about it, but the next morning I woke up much later than usual. Right away, something felt off. I reached over for my phone, expecting it to be where it always was, but it wasn't there. After a few seconds of half-asleep searching, I found it underneath me, and it was dead. That alone was weird, because I had no memory of taking it off the charger or falling asleep with it in my hand. But I tried to brush it off. I figured maybe I had been more tired than I realized. So I plugged it in, waited for it to turn back on, and opened Snapchat. That's when my stomach dropped. I had messages from people I barely ever spoke to. Then I saw loads of messages from friends too. Way more than normal. Instantly, I knew something had happened. My first thought was, did I post something? So before replying to anyone, I checked my Snapchat story. Nothing. Then I checked Instagram just in case. Nothing there either. I thought maybe people were messing with me, but then I opened a message from my friend Callan, and he said, "Why do you have that on your story?" I checked again. Still nothing. There was no story showing for me at all. I told him I couldn't see anything, and he sent me a screen recording. Then he sent a screenshot too. And there it was, a story, posted from my account. It was this ridiculous meme picture. Nothing serious, nothing embarrassing in a massive way, just completely random. But the thing was, I couldn't see it from my own account. It didn't exist on my end. That's when I started feeling properly creeped out, because my sisters hadn't messaged me about it. Neither had Mara, one of my closest friends. And those are exactly the people who would have told me first if I had posted something strange. So I messaged them and asked, "Can you see my story?" They both said no. Then I started asking other people. Some could see it, some couldn't. There was no pattern at all. It was like the story existed for certain people, but not for others. And somehow, I was one of the people who couldn't see it, even though it was supposedly posted from my own account. I asked someone who could see it to reply to the story, hoping that maybe if they replied, I'd be able to open it from the message and delete it. But no, their reply came through, yet I still had no option to remove the story. At that point, I was really starting to panic. I barely ever posted anything anywhere, so having some random meme sitting on my story felt bizarre enough. But not being able to see it or delete it made it so much worse. Then my friend told me the story said it had been posted hours earlier. I don't remember the exact wording anymore, but I do remember working out the time. It would have been around 5 a.m., and I know I was asleep at 5 a.m. At least, I'm almost certain I was. The other strange part is the photo itself. I'm nearly sure that meme wasn't even in my camera roll. Maybe it was and I just forgot, but I really don't think so. It was on an old phone, so I can't check anymore. I kept trying to make it make sense. Maybe I was exhausted and somehow fell asleep holding my phone. Maybe I woke up without remembering and posted something by accident. Maybe the picture really was saved somewhere on my phone. But none of that explains why I couldn't see my own story. It doesn't explain why only random people could see it. It doesn't explain why people close to me couldn't see it. It doesn't explain why I couldn't delete it. And it definitely doesn't explain why my phone was dead underneath me when I had no memory of using it after going to bed. For a while, I wondered if I had been hacked. but even that didn't fully add up. Why would a hacker post a random meme, only make it visible to some people, and hide it from me? The whole thing made me feel like I had lost a chunk of time. Not in a dramatic way, but in this quiet, horrible way where you start questioning your own memory. I still have a screenshot, and my friend still had the screen recording at the time, so I know it actually happened. It wasn't just a dream, or me misreading something. I've gone over it so many times, and I still don't have a proper answer. It's probably the strangest thing that has ever happened to me, and honestly, it still bothers me. I want to start by saying I'm really not the kind of person who calls every strange thing paranormal. I grew up in Appalachia, and I still live around these mountains, so I was raised hearing all the old stories people tell about this place. And sure, I've seen strange things here. Most people who live in the mountains have. But I've never been quick to say, that was supernatural. Except for this. The first time it happened, I was 9 years old. It was Christmas Eve, and I was in bed, wide awake, because of course I was. Christmas morning was only a few hours away, and I was a kid with absolutely no chance of falling asleep. Then I heard this sound. I didn't know what it was. I still don't, honestly. But I remember the fear hitting me instantly. At first, it sounded like it was right outside my window. Then it sounded like it was under my bed. Then it was in the closet. And I know how that sounds. I know people might say my imagination was running wild because I was a child, but it wasn't like that. The sound was moving. The direction of it changed so clearly that even at 9 years old, I knew I wasn't just confusing myself. I laid there completely still for several minutes. I didn't even want to breathe too loudly. The noise kept going, and what I remember most is how rhythmic it was. Same sound, same length, same pause. Over and over again, with no break. The only reason I finally got up was because I heard my older brother, Nolan, open his bedroom door. He was about 14 at the time. When I stepped into the hallway, he looked at me and immediately said, "You hear that too?" And that scared me even more, because he had heard the exact same thing. He said it had been moving around his room too, from outside his window to different corners inside his bedroom. And while our rooms were close, they weren't right beside each other. For something outside to move between both windows, it would have had to go around the side of the house, through the snow, without leaving any sound of movement. And whatever was making that noise sounded big enough that it should have made some kind of sound walking through snow. Nolan described it as a person getting hit in the throat and trying really hard to breathe. I've never found a better way to explain it. It sounded human, but wrong. Like someone wheezing as hard as they possibly could through a crushed or injured airway. It sounded painful. It sounded desperate. Even as a kid, I remember thinking that if a real person sounded like that, they were in serious trouble. Our parents heard us talking in the hallway and came out to check on us. We told them what we were hearing, and the sound was still happening. Nolan and I could both hear it clearly from the hallway, but our parents said they couldn't hear anything at all. That part has always bothered me. My parents weren't the type to brush things off just to calm us down. They could see we were genuinely terrified. If they had heard it, they would have said so. I really believe that. But they heard nothing. Over the years, I've asked people what they think it could have been. Online, in person, everywhere. I've heard every answer you can imagine. Foxes, owls, raccoons, possums, mice in the walls, an injured deer, some kind of sick animal. I've looked up all those sounds. None of them were even close. The next morning, my family and I went outside to look around the house. There was snow on the ground, but there were no footprints, no tracks at all. It hadn't snowed during the night, and there wasn't enough wind to cover anything up. There was just nothing. The second time it happened, I was 13. I was sitting on the living room couch in the middle of the day, home alone, with the window just off to my side. And then I heard it again. That same wheezing. It was daylight, which somehow made it worse. I know that probably sounds strange, but it shook me so badly that I couldn't even make myself turn and look out the window. When I'm really scared, I freeze. I always have. Some people run, some people scream, some people investigate. I just lock up. So I sat there while it happened. This time, it didn't last as long. Maybe a minute, maybe two. It was quieter than the first time, and it didn't move around the room. It stayed outside the window. After it stopped, I waited a few minutes before I finally looked outside. Again, no tracks. Nothing near the window. Nothing in the yard. I went straight to my room after that and didn't tell many people about it for a long time. Then, a few nights ago, I heard it again. I was in bed and it was late. The room was quiet and out of nowhere, there it was. Only this time, it was much softer, much shorter, maybe 10 seconds total. 2 or 3 low, strained wheezing sounds, and then it stopped. It was so quiet I almost convinced myself I hadn't heard it at all. But I know that sound. I wish I could tell you exactly where it came from this last time, but I can't. It was too brief, too faint, and honestly, I was too stunned to process it clearly. I just lay there trying to decide if it was really happening again. And I keep thinking about that old idea that once is strange, twice is a coincidence, and 3 times is a pattern. That's why I'm telling this now. Because whatever that sound is, it came back. I know this is going to sound like something pulled straight out of a cheap internet horror story. And honestly, that's part of what still bothers me about it. It almost feels like whatever happened was aware of how ridiculous it seemed. Like it was playing into that on purpose. But this really did happen to me, and for a long time, I kept it tucked away in the back of my mind. I was about 9 years old at the time. It was sometime in the early afternoon, maybe around 1 or 2, and I was alone in my bedroom watching TV. I remember scrolling through the search menu, the one that brought up a little watch list as you typed or moved through different titles. I was bored, just clicking through things without really looking for anything specific. Then I saw it. The title had Elmo's name in big white letters, bold and plain, almost too plain. The thumbnail showed him standing on the left side of the screen, staring off somewhere past the edge of the frame. Behind him was this flat gray background that faded darker toward the top. The strange thing is, I never liked Elmo. I didn't really like Sesame Street in general. Something about the characters always made me uncomfortable, even when I was little. So I have no idea why something like that would have been suggested to me. But what caught my attention was the category. It was listed as a documentary. That made me curious enough to click on it, which I still regret. At the time, I thought maybe it was some behind-the-scenes special or a weird making-of feature. It started that way too. There was a studio intro, little opening credits, and then it cut to an interview with a man who said he was the director. He looked like he was somewhere in his 40s, with tired eyes and streaks of gray in his hair. After that, there was a woman named Mara, maybe in her early 30s, with dark auburn hair. She was introduced as one of the writers. Then it showed 3 kids sitting in separate chairs, each talking like they had been part of the cast. Everyone was discussing normal production stuff, costumes, sets, rehearsals, what it was like filming with puppet characters. It all felt strangely legitimate. Then the footage changed. Without warning, it cut to Elmo, He was standing in front of that same gray background from the thumbnail. No music, no interview audio, nothing. He was just staring directly into the camera. At first, I froze because it felt so sudden. Then he started getting closer. Not walking exactly, more like the image itself was pushing toward me. His face kept filling more and more of the screen, and I had this horrible feeling that he wasn't looking at a camera anymore. He was looking at me. I stared back for a few seconds, too scared to move, and then I finally snapped out of it and turned the TV off. For a moment, I just sat there. My whole body felt locked up. Then I ran out of my room and into the living room. I'm honestly surprised I didn't cry, because I was terrified in a way I didn't really understand. I didn't go back into my bedroom until my little brother came with me. I told him I just didn't want to be alone, but I didn't tell him why. I was embarrassed, I think. Or maybe I was afraid saying it out loud would make it feel more real. When I checked the watch list again later, the documentary was gone. I searched for it. I tried to find the title again. Nothing came up. No thumbnail, no listing, no history, no proof that it had ever been there. So I told myself I had imagined it. That maybe I'd been tired, or maybe I'd clicked on something else and misunderstood what I saw. That explanation helped a little, but not enough. For about a week afterward, I had nightmares about that gray background and that face moving closer. Eventually, I buried the memory. I didn't bring it up again until years later, after my family had moved out of that house. When I finally told them, they half joked that maybe something had been feeding off my fear, like some nasty little creature that knew exactly how to scare a kid and enjoyed every second of it. I laughed when they said that, but honestly, part of me still wonders if they were closer to the truth than any of us wanted to admit. Before I get into the experiences themselves, I want to explain what I mean when I say spirits. Honestly, I still don't fully know what I believe. I don't think anyone can prove, with absolute certainty, what these things are. But based on what I've gone through, I do believe there are dark or negative entities around us. I don't think they're the same as what people might call good spirits. To me, good spirits are more like loved ones who have passed away. Family, friends, people who were once here with us. I don't necessarily believe they're still walking around on Earth the way we are, but I do believe they stay connected to us somehow. But the darker things, I don't think they were ever human. I also don't really like calling them demons because I'm not a religious person. That's where it gets complicated for me. Maybe there's some kind of negative energy that has taken shape, or maybe there's something way beyond what we're able to understand. I don't know exactly what they are, but I do believe they exist. The first experience that really shook me happened when my family and I were in the middle of moving out of our old house and into the place we live now. It was one of my last nights there, and I was in the bathroom by myself. I was facing the shower curtain when, out of nowhere, it was yanked hard to the side. And I mean, yanked. I could actually see the curtain cave in where it looked like someone had grabbed it with a hand. There was no one else in the bathroom. No window open, no air blowing, nothing that could have caused it. I just froze. There had been smaller, strange things in that house before, but nothing like that. That one stayed with me because, I'm sorry, but I still can't find a normal explanation for it. Another time, my sister Lena and I were sitting on the couch together. We had 2 cats, and both of them were asleep on the couch with us. My dad was asleep in his room, and there was nobody else in the house. Then suddenly, we heard this loud shuffling sound. It sounded exactly like someone dragging their feet quickly across the floor, coming straight toward us. Both of us jumped at the same time and looked at each other. We didn't even have to say anything at first, because We both knew we had heard the exact same thing. But when we looked, there was nobody there. The cats were still on the couch. My dad was still asleep. Nothing had fallen. Nothing had moved. That one still bothers me because it sounded so physical. It wasn't some vague noise in the walls. It sounded like a person rushing toward us. And then there was the Ouija board. I know people make jokes about them, and I understand why. They were sold in toy stores at one point, so of course some people don't take them seriously. But I'm telling you, they are not something to mess around with casually. The first time I used one, I didn't go into it scared. I didn't leave the session scared either. So I really don't believe this was just me psyching myself out. But the week after that was one of the worst weeks of my life. Before using that board, I had never had sleep paralysis. Not once. Then the very next night, it happened. I woke up unable to move, and I felt something grab my shoulders with force. Then I heard what sounded like a woman growling right beside my ear. It felt like she was slowly dragging me across the bed toward the edge. I remember breathing so heavily, trying with everything in me to snap out of it. But I couldn't. When I finally woke up fully, I had to just sit there and collect myself. I was terrified. And it kept happening that entire week. Every time I fell asleep, I went straight into paralysis. Sometimes it was simple, just being stuck and unable to move. Other times, there were visuals. Other times, sounds. It felt like my room wasn't safe anymore. There was even one night where I woke up, or thought I woke up, in my room. Something immediately felt wrong. I tried to turn on the lights, but they wouldn't work. Then I looked into the hallway, and I felt the darkest energy I've ever felt in my life. It was heavy, like the air itself had gone bad. I remember feeling pure fear, and then I woke up for real. The only thing that finally made it stop was sleeping with the lights on and completely covering myself with blankets and pillows. My face, my body, everything. I don't know why that worked, but somehow it did. After that, the paralysis stopped. I kept sleeping with the lights on for almost a year before I was finally comfortable sleeping in the dark again. So, what do I take from all of this? Whatever these things are, I don't think they like light. At least in my case, they really seemed to lose power when the lights were on. And please, be careful with Ouija boards. I've used them since then, but only with much more caution and respect. Honestly, do your research first, or don't bother touching one at all. I know the brain is powerful. I know skeptics will always have reasons for why things can't be real. And I'm not saying every strange thing is paranormal, but I've experienced enough to know that something is out there, and I do think sleep paralysis is connected to it somehow. I don't believe these things usually hurt us physically. At least, I've never been physically harmed by it. But mentally, that's where I think they get to you. That's where they leave the mark. I want to tell you about something strange that's been happening around our house. A few months back, I was home alone except for our 2 cats. I had a dull headache that day, nothing dramatic, just enough to make everything feel a little off. I remember walking down the stairs and turning into the living room, where we have this big window that looks out over the front yard. And just as I came into the room, I caught something in the corner of my eye. It looked like a figure. Almost human-shaped, but not quite. Mostly dark brown, standing near one of the trees. For a second, I thought it was leaning there, like it had been watching the house. But when I turned my head to really look at it, it bolted. I mean, it moved fast, faster than anything I've ever seen move through a yard. It slipped behind the tree and disappeared toward the neighbor's place. The part that stayed with me was where it had been standing, and the direction it ran. I didn't know it yet, but that would matter later. Then, a few weeks ago, something else happened. I was upstairs, looking out one of the windows. I can't remember whether I was alone that time or not, but I remember this sudden pull in my attention. Something made me look down and to the right, and then I felt it. That unmistakable feeling of being watched. I didn't see a face. I didn't see a body. What I saw was a flash of a white wing as it flew away. It was about the size you'd expect on a crow, except it was completely white. Now, we do have white birds around here. Gulls, swans, a few others near the water. But I have never seen an all-white bird in our yard, and I can't think of any reason a gull or swan would be that close to the house when there's a reservoir about a mile away. Whatever it was, it flew off in the same direction as the first thing I saw. A little while later, my fiancée, Alara, and I were putting together some furniture, and I finally told her, "I've seen two things around the house that I can't explain." She stopped what she was doing and asked me if I was serious. Then she told me what had happened to her. She had been working from the couch one Friday afternoon, right in the middle of an important meeting with senior leadership from her company. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw movement outside. When she looked up, there was this white flash in the front yard. It shot from the yard toward the side of the house, but she said the strangest part was how it moved. It didn't move like a bird. It didn't move like a reflection. It was too fast, and it felt like it was trying not to be seen. She said it wasn't on the ground either. It was maybe 5 feet up in the air, only about 1 or 2 feet tall and wide. Not human-shaped at all. More like an abstract blur, almost like a wing, but not clearly one. You know how in old photographs, when something moves too quickly, it leaves that smeared blur behind it? She said it looked like that, except it was happening in real life. We do have roads in front of and behind the house, and sometimes headlights can glare through the windows. But this was in the afternoon, and we've never seen anything like it before or since. We checked the security cameras too. Nothing. So now we have a few theories, though none of them feel complete. Around the time I first saw the brown figure, we had started working on the flower beds near the front door. We were careful about it. We chose native plants, looked up how to care for them, and tried to bring that part of the yard back to life. As far as I know, those beds hadn't been touched in years. The woman who lived here before us didn't really have the strength for gardening anymore. So part of me wonders whether we disturbed something that had been resting there. Or maybe, in some strange way, we woke something up. There's also a patch of clover in the yard, near the area where we've seen these things. Right in the middle of it, the grass looks pressed down, almost like something has been sitting there. Another thought is connected to my mother. She has always believed she has guardian angels. I don't know if I believe that about myself, but I did text her after all this happened. She didn't say, "Yes, that's what it is," but she told me I should plant a white rose and make peace with whatever was there. And then there's the more tender possibility. Alara and I have been trying to have a baby. Around the time of the first sighting, she had a miscarriage. So we wondered, quietly and carefully, if maybe what I saw was the soul of that child. Maybe coming near us, maybe shy, maybe not ready to be seen. Or maybe, and I know how this sounds, it could be the souls of future children passing through, trying to see what life with us might be like, trying to decide whether this is the right home, the right time, the right world to enter. I'm not usually someone who jumps to paranormal explanations. I know there's always a chance that stress, grief, light, animals, and imagination all tangled together and made something ordinary look impossible. We do have plenty of wildlife around here. Birds, squirrels, stray cats wandering through the neighborhood. The area has enough trees that something could easily hide or move quickly without us understanding what we saw. But still, 3 sightings, similar area, same direction of movement, that same feeling of something not wanting to be noticed. I don't know what it is. I just know that something has been moving through our yard, and whatever it is, it feels like it sees us before we ever see it. I've been a nurse for nearly 5 decades now, and I still work as a pediatric hospice RN. These days, I care for newborns and infants with severe congenital conditions. Sometimes, parents choose to bring their baby home so life support can be withdrawn in a quiet, loving place, surrounded by family. Those moments are tender beyond words, and maybe someday I'll share more about them. I became a hospice nurse after losing my 2 boys. When they were dying, I couldn't do the things every mother wishes she could do. I couldn't take away their pain. I couldn't ease all their fear. I couldn't hold them through every single second the way my heart wanted to. But later, I realized I could do that for others. My first hospice work was in an inpatient AIDS facility back in the late 1980s, when the disease was still considered a death sentence. We cared for people of all ages there. When that facility closed because of funding, I moved to a small 10-bed hospice unit, mostly for adults. After that, I spent several years in a pediatric hospice unit, caring for newborns through teenagers. That unit eventually closed too, also because of funding. Now I do one-on-one home care with babies and children who are terminally ill. But this story happened years ago, in that little adult inpatient hospice unit. I had come in for a 12-hour shift, and we had a few new patients that day. One of them was an elderly woman, I'd guess maybe late 70s or early 80s. I'll call her Miss Eleanor. She was completely unresponsive. Total care. She was there for end-of-life support, just like many of our patients were. I cleaned her up, repositioned her, made sure she was comfortable, gave her pain medication, and then moved on to care for my next patient. As the shift went on, I was walking down the hallway to help someone else. Out of habit, I glanced into each room as I passed, just checking that everyone was settled and safe. When I passed Miss Eleanor's room, I saw her sitting on the side of her bed. Her side rails were down. Her feet were touching the floor. She was sitting upright by herself, smiling right at me. And she looked young. Not just a little more alert, not simply more awake. She looked radiant, peaceful, almost glowing from the inside out. I had already passed her doorway by a few steps when my mind caught up with what I'd seen. I stopped. Then I backed up and looked into her room again. And there she was, back in bed, side rails up, unresponsive again. In the same position I had placed her in earlier. There was one more thing. When I saw her sitting there smiling, she had both legs. But in her physical body, Miss Eleanor only had one. Her other leg had been amputated years before. I stood there for a moment, just taking it in. Then I smiled and spoke softly to her. I said, "You showed me your soul." I thanked her. I told her I believed she was getting ready to pass on, and that I was grateful she had allowed me to witness even a small part of what she was experiencing. I shared it with the other nurses too. In hospice, especially in those quiet rooms near the end of life, people see things. They hear things. They feel things. Not everyone talks about it, but many of us know. At the end of my shift, Miss Eleanor was still alive. I gave report to the oncoming staff and told them what I had seen. They weren't frightened or dismissive. They were almost happy for me because they understood how rare and sacred something like that can feel. Then I went home. I remember walking into my house, tired from the long shift, expecting nothing more than a quiet hallway and maybe a cup of tea. But there, standing in my hallway, was Miss Eleanor. She was wearing a soft robe. She was smiling at me. Only now she looked about 28 or 30 years old. Her hair was beautiful, as if she had just stepped out of a salon. She looked whole, bright, young, and she had both legs. She stood there for only a brief moment. Then she faded away. In my heart, I thanked her again. I didn't say anything out loud at first. I just stood there, stunned and grateful. Then I picked up the phone and called the hospice unit. I told them, "Please go check on Miss Eleanor." They set the phone down. A minute or two later, someone came back and told me she had just died. They had been in her room only moments before, repositioning her, and she was still alive then. I don't know why she came to me. I don't know why she didn't appear to one of her loved ones instead. I had never met her before that shift. I didn't know her story, not really. I only knew her as my patient for a handful of hours, but for whatever reason, she chose to show me something before she died, and then again after. And I have carried that blessing with me ever since. I still think of her. I still thank her. Some people may hear this story and not know what to do with it. That's all right. I once told it at a nursing event with over 1,000 people in the room. Many simply stared at me, but a few smiled and nodded. They knew. Because when you work close to the edge between life and death, sometimes the veil gets very thin. And every now and then, someone lets you see the light on the other side. I used to deliver newspapers with my dad in the early morning. We were subcontractors, so the delivery truck would show up around 12:45 a.m., and by a little after 1:15, we'd have the car packed and be out on the route. For the first few weeks, nothing really happened. It was just quiet roads, porch lights, empty streets, and that strange feeling you get when the whole world seems asleep except for you. But about 2 months in, something happened that I still think about. There was one customer who lived behind a row of houses, tucked back off the road with this long driveway. Most mornings, we could either turn around in it or pull close enough for me to toss the paper right onto the porch from the car. But one morning, around 2:40 a.m., her car was parked in a way that blocked most of the driveway, so I had to get out and walk the newspaper up to her porch. I placed it down, turned around, and started walking back to the car. That's when I heard something behind me. It sounded like wings flapping in the tree, but not normal wings. Not a little bird, not an owl, not anything I'd ever heard before. This was heavy, big. The sound got louder and louder, like whatever was up there was beating the air with a lot of force. I turned around and looked up into the tree, but I couldn't see anything. No shape, no eyes, no outline. Just branches moving hard, like something had stirred them up from inside the tree. The thing is, there was no wind that morning, none at all. The air was completely still. The second I saw those branches moving, I hurried back to the car. My dad looked at me and asked what was wrong, and I told him, "Look at the tree." By then, the branches were still moving a little, but not nearly as much as before. At first, he said it was probably just wind, but I told him there wasn't any. And I knew there wasn't. Everything else around us was perfectly still. That was the only time something like that happened at that house. But for weeks afterward, I hated delivering there. Every time we pulled onto that street, I felt my stomach tighten. We don't deliver newspapers anymore, but we still drive past that area sometimes because it's close to where we live and on the way to the store. I still look over there. I still wonder what was in that tree. And honestly, I'm glad I didn't see it. If I had to guess, maybe it was some huge bird, something like a shoebill or a crane. But birds like that don't live around here. We don't have anything with wings big enough to shake tree branches like that. The second incident happened about a month later. There was a funeral home on our route, and one of our customers lived there. I never liked that stop. I wouldn't get out of the car for it. I'd always have my dad pull into the drive, get close to the steps, and I'd place the paper where I could without stepping outside. Nothing strange had ever happened there before, and nothing strange happened thereafter. Just that one night. It was somewhere around 3:10 in the morning. We had just dropped off the paper and were pulling out of the driveway, turning right toward the next street. For some reason, I felt like I needed to look back at the main entrance. The front doors were glass, so normally you could see into the little space between the outside door and the inner door. But when I looked, there was a man standing there. Just standing between the doors. At first I thought maybe it was a person. Weird, sure, because of the time, but still possible. Then I realized I could see through him. I could see the inside of the building through his body. I did a double take immediately because my brain didn't want to accept what I'd just seen. But when I looked again, he was gone. I know people could say I was tired, or that my mind was playing tricks on me. But I wasn't tired on that route. I was always awake. Alert, even. There's something about those hours that keeps your nerves sharp. Those were the only two strange things that ever happened while we had that job. We didn't stay with it much longer after that. But even now, I can still replay both moments in my head. The branches shaking in the still air. The man in the funeral home doorway. Clear as anything. And I still don't know what I saw. Apparently, the more I look into this, the more I realize I'm not the only one who's had strange things happen after having a baby. Maybe it's lack of sleep. Maybe it's postpartum anxiety. Maybe it's something paranormal being drawn to a newborn. I don't know. I just know what happened in my house, and honestly, I'd really like to know if anyone else has gone through something similar. My husband and I live in the house I grew up in. When I was a kid, I would hear things sometimes. Voices in the hallway, footsteps at night, little sounds that didn't quite belong. But nothing ever really terrified me. My mom and my sister, though, had a very different experience. My sister used to say she saw a tall shadow figure around the house. She even gave it a name as a joke. She called it Albert. Years later, we found out we actually had an ancestor named Albert, which made the whole thing feel a little less funny. Things would move around in her room. Sometimes strange shapes or faces would show up in photos. But the moment I'll never forget happened when we were teenagers. We were sitting on her bed, just talking, when suddenly everything on the shelves in her closet came crashing down at once. Not one thing slipping, not a shelf breaking. Everything flew off. We both screamed and ran out of the room. My mom saw the shadow too. She also used to hear my sister or me calling for her when we hadn't said anything. And my dad, who is deeply religious and does not believe in paranormal things at all, heard it once too. He and my mom were in the kitchen talking when they both stopped because they heard my voice call, "Mom?" from another room. The problem was, I wasn't home. I was at a friend's house. Eventually, my mom and sister moved out, and they both said whatever it was seemed to follow them. They still heard and saw things in their new places. I believed them, partly because when my husband and I moved into the old house, it became quiet. Completely quiet. For 3 years, nothing really happened. Then we brought our daughter home last autumn. At first, I tried to explain it away. I thought maybe I was just awake at hours I hadn't been awake before. Maybe the house had always made those sounds, and I was only noticing them now because I was up feeding a baby in the dark. But then the voices started again. Footsteps, too. The first thing that really bothered us was that my husband began hearing my voice calling for him at night. We blamed exhaustion at first, Newborn fog is its own strange little universe. But by the time our daughter was around 2 months old, she was sleeping much better. She usually only woke once, so I handled the night feedings so he could sleep before work. And he still kept hearing me call his name. Except I wasn't. The first moment that truly scared me happened one night when our daughter woke up screaming. Not crying, screaming. I was pacing back and forth with her, bouncing her, whispering to her, trying everything I could think of. Then, out of nowhere, I felt this cold rush crawl up my back. It wasn't like a draft. It felt focused, heavy, like something had stepped close behind me. The second it happened, my daughter stopped crying. Completely stopped. Then her eyes fixed on something just over my shoulder. I didn't turn around. I just sat down in the rocking chair with her pressed against me and stayed there, frozen and wide awake, for the rest of the night. A couple weeks later, it happened again. My daughter woke up early, so I brought her into the living room to feed her. We played for a little while, and then I got ready to rock her down for her first nap. At that time, the rocking chair was facing away from the hallway, with its back toward our bedroom door. I sat down, and she started fussing. Then I felt that same cold chill. She went quiet. Her eyes moved past me. And then I heard our bedroom doorknob turn. It clicked. The door had been fully shut, but it slowly opened behind me. I called out for my husband because I wanted so badly for there to be a normal explanation. I hoped he had heard the baby fussing and gotten up to check on us. But when I turned around, no one was there. I shouted for him again, louder this time, and he came stumbling out of bed, still half asleep. He had been snoring. He hadn't touched the door. That scared me so badly that we rearranged the living room the next day. The rocking chair is in a corner now. I need my back to the wall. Since then, I've seen the bedroom door open a couple more times, but I don't latch it fully anymore. That way I can tell myself it's just the fan, that maybe the air finally pushed it open after running all night. I still hear the voices sometimes. I still hear footsteps in the dark. But nothing has scared me as badly as those 2 nights. So I guess that's why I'm sharing this. Has anyone else experienced something like this after having a baby? Because I keep trying to explain it away, but a part of me feels like something in this house woke back up when we brought our daughter home. I've always been a very spiritual person, and in some way, I feel like I've had a gift my whole life. It's come and gone over the years, but it was always there in the background. Most of the time, it felt gentle, comforting even. But last year, something changed. I started seeing really dark, frightening things as I was falling asleep. Not dreams exactly, because I was still in that in-between place where you're not fully asleep yet. And these visions were so graphic and disturbing that they genuinely scared me in a way I had never experienced before. Before that, anything spiritual I had experienced had been peaceful or meaningful. But this was different. It happened around 5 times, and each time it was something slightly different. The first time, I saw this figure with blackened skin, a badly distorted mouth, blood around it, and a face that looked burned. It didn't appear smoothly either. It flashed in and out, almost like someone flicking a light switch. That's the only way I can describe it. Then, somehow, it looked like it was standing high up at the back of a church, just watching. Another time, I saw something with red skin and horns. It looked furious, but that one felt more like a still image than a moving vision. Then there was another dark figure with a snake-like tongue and this horrible, threatening expression. The one that really unsettled me was gray and crawling on all 4s. I saw it come through a doorway, drop down, and then suddenly leap toward me. It came so close that I opened my eyes immediately because I couldn't handle it. Every single one of these happened only when I was beginning to fall asleep, never in the middle of the day, never when I was fully awake, just in that drifting off stage. After that, I stepped away from everything spiritual. I got rid of almost all my tools, books, crystals, tarot cards, everything. I just didn't want anything to do with it anymore. It frightened me that much. At the time, I had been heavily involved in witchcraft, tarot, crystals, and spell work since I was about 16. I had also bought some spell oils that seemed harmless enough at first, but later I found out the person who made them worked with darker spirits, including succubus-type entities. I had also been honoring Greek and Norse deities, especially Hecate and Freya. And emotionally, I was in a really bad place then. My aunt had just been diagnosed with cancer, and around the same time, my partner of nearly 6 years cheated on me. It all happened within the same week, and I was completely overwhelmed. Around that period, I also had a vision of a poppet, like the kind used in spell work. I saw someone doing spells, but I knew somehow that it wasn't my own work. That made me wonder if maybe I was spiritually vulnerable, or operating from such a low place emotionally that something negative had attached itself to me. Part of me even wondered whether something had been put on me. After those experiences, I left all of it behind. For the first time in my life, I prayed properly. I started reading the Bible. I turned to Jesus, and ever since then, I've avoided anything that feels remotely connected to the spiritual practices I used to do. But the other night, it happened again. This time, I saw a figure with long hair and a gold crown on its head. Again, it only happened as I was falling asleep. It doesn't happen often now, but when it does, it still shakes me. I've spoken to a few spiritual people about it, but most of them just think I imagined it. A medium once told me I was seeing demons, but they didn't give me any guidance beyond that. I know how it sounds, but it didn't feel like something I simply made up. The images were too vivid, too specific, and too terrifying. And because this only started after years of otherwise peaceful spiritual experiences, it left me wondering what really happened and why it changed so suddenly. Okay, so I just got back from Jame, Arizona, and I'm still trying to make sense of what happened. My girlfriend and I spent Saturday night at the Jame Grand Hotel. We ended up staying in room 14, which, according to the hotel staff and the ghost tour guide, used to be the living quarters of a man named Clint Harrow. He's apparently one of the more well-known spirits around Jame because he died at the bottom of the old elevator shaft. But honestly, that's not even where anything happened. The whole thing started when we decided, very last minute, to sign up for a ghost tour. We got lucky and took the final 2 spots. They handed us EMF readers and spirit boxes, and at first, we were kind of laughing about it. Our first stop was literally a parking lot, and I remember thinking, okay, are we really doing this? Are we just wandering around between cars with ghost hunting gadgets? But the guide explained that a lot of those parking lots were places where buildings used to stand before Jame's fires destroyed them. So underneath all that asphalt, there was history. Burned down homes, businesses, whole little pieces of people's lives. After that, we walked to a church, but we couldn't go inside, so we just stayed near the front. Nothing happened there. No readings, no voices, nothing. Then we went to the building where the tour office was located, and the guide told us stories about arson, bootlegging, and a smuggler from the Prohibition era. They dared a few of us to stand in this dark back corner, but again, nothing really happened. The final stop on the basic tour was the old smelter area. The guide told us this awful story about burned bodies mixing with the smelt and how parts of the town were built with concrete and asphalt that may have contained the ashes of the dead. So we were basically standing on streets made of ghosts. At that point, the tour was technically over unless you had paid for the extended package. My girlfriend and I looked at each other and decided, why not? We paid the extra fee and stayed with the group. That's when we went to the old Jerome High School. From the outside, it already felt wrong in that old building way, like the windows were watching you instead of the other way around. Inside, it was even heavier. The guide said the building had been used for art studios and band practice rooms over the years, but the auditorium was mostly untouched and going through some repairs. After the guide gave us some history, the group started moving toward the stage. I was holding my EMF reader, and all of a sudden, it jumped from green to yellow. That was the first moment I stopped joking around. I looked around and asked, "Am I alone?" Nothing came through the spirit box. I took a few steps and the reader stayed yellow. I checked my phone. I checked the spirit box. I wanted to make sure nothing I had was causing interference. Then I asked, "What's your name?" And clear as day, through the box, I heard, "Walter." I froze. I asked it to repeat the name, but nothing came through after that. My girlfriend noticed I had stopped moving and came back toward me. Right then, I heard this soft creaking sound from the seats just above where I was standing. It sounded like someone shifting their weight in an old theater chair. I didn't want to look. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I could feel something there. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it behind me. So I asked, "Are you behind me?" No answer. My girlfriend told me we needed to stay with the group, and as soon as she got closer, the EMF reader dropped back down to 2 green dots. Then she started walking away again. The reader jumped to orange, then settled back on yellow. That's when I said out loud, "I need to go." And the spirit box said, "Don't leave." I just stood there for a second, trying to process it. My brain was scrambling for some normal explanation, but I couldn't find one. I started walking away, and the box said, "Don't." I kept going, and the EMF reader finally dropped back down to 1 green dot. I didn't understand what had just happened. I still don't. After that, the group went downstairs to the boiler room, and there was another strange experience down there, but that's a whole separate story. When we left, we had to pass back through the auditorium. I don't know why I did it, but I said out loud, "I'm leaving, Walter." The EMF reader jumped right back to yellow. The second we walked out of the auditorium, it dropped back to 1 green dot. After that, we went to the cemetery, but nothing happened there. We saw a couple of scorpions, which honestly felt pretty normal compared to everything else. Then the tour ended. We went back to the hotel, and that's another story too. But here's the part that really made me decide to tell someone. I got home to Tucson this evening. I wear this silver chain that I've had for over 20 years. I took it off last night and put it back on this morning like always. Tonight, when I went to take it off, it basically fell from my neck. But when I looked at it, the clasp was still closed. It looked like the chain had been yanked or pulled hard enough to come off without unclasping. I don't have an explanation for that, and that's why I'm sharing this now. I don't know what happened in that auditorium, and I don't know if something came back with me. But what a weekend. I want to tell you about something that happened to my older sister when she was a teenager, probably a little over 10 years ago now. She told me this story years back, and even though some of the details are a little hazy, the parts I do remember have always stayed with me. It started with her closest friend, who I'll call Mira. They were the kind of friends who were practically glued together. They lived close by, spent entire weekends at each other's houses, and sleepovers were just a normal part of their friendship. One night, my sister and another friend were staying over at Mira's house. Mira had already fallen asleep, but the other two were still awake, just talking quietly and hanging out. There were a few drinking glasses sitting on a table nearby, and out of nowhere, one of them slid across the surface by itself. Not tipped, Not bumped. It just moved. They both froze, of course. It was the first time anything like that had happened, and neither of them knew what to say. But they were young, and honestly, they didn't want to believe it was anything strange, so they tried to explain it away. Maybe the table was uneven. Maybe someone had nudged it without noticing. Maybe there was condensation under the glass. Anything that made it feel less frightening. A few years later, Mira's family moved into a house directly across the street from where my sister lived. Since they were still close, Mira invited my sister over to help unpack and move things around. I had been inside that house a couple of times too, because Mira had a younger sister around my age, and I remember the place having a very heavy feeling. Not scary in an obvious way, but uncomfortable, like the air had been sitting still for too long. While they were moving in, my sister went into one of the upstairs rooms. The walls were painted a faded rose color, and the room was covered in crosses, holy pictures, and little religious objects. Before Mira's family bought the house, an older man had lived there with his mother, so everyone assumed the room had probably belonged to her. People said she had been deeply religious. Later on, while going through some drawers that had been left behind, Mira's family found photographs of the man who used to live there, posing with naked women. It was strange and unsettling, especially considering the room they had found, but they didn't make a big thing out of it. Weird, yes. Paranormal, no. Then one afternoon, my sister was over at Mira's house again. The house had 2 floors, and everyone was downstairs. Mira's mom was in the kitchen making food, her dad was watching TV, and most of Mira's sisters were out. The only one supposedly home was her younger sister, who I'll call Nina. While they were sitting downstairs, they suddenly heard loud footsteps upstairs. Not soft creaking or normal house sounds. It sounded like someone running back and forth, followed by heavy banging. Mira's dad immediately shouted upstairs, thinking Nina was messing around and telling her to stop. But a few seconds later, Nina walked out of the downstairs bathroom and looked completely confused. She said, "That wasn't me." Everyone went quiet for a moment, but again, they pushed it aside. Nobody in that family was really the type to jump to ghost stories. They always tried to be practical about it, even when things didn't quite fit. Sometime after that, Mira called my sister late at night, absolutely terrified. She said there was banging and scratching coming from a room in the house that they had never been able to open. When they first moved in, that room had been locked with a padlock, and since they didn't have the key, they had just left it alone instead of breaking it open. But that night, Mira said it sounded like something was trapped inside. Scraping, hitting, moving around, loud enough that she couldn't sleep. The next morning, when everyone woke up, the door to that room was standing wide open. Inside, there was nothing dramatic. No hidden shrine, no awful discovery. Just old storage items, dusty odds and ends, and one chair sitting by itself in the middle of the room. That image bothers me the most, honestly. Just one chair, waiting there. The last thing I remember my sister telling me happened before she and Mira eventually drifted apart. My sister slept over at the house one night, and everything seemed normal when they went to bed. But sometime in the middle of the night, she woke up to the sound of crying. Then she heard what sounded like muffled screaming. It wasn't coming from inside the bedroom. It sounded like it was outside the house. There was a strong wind that night, so maybe that explains it. Wind can make strange noises when it moves through trees, gutters, cracks, and old walls. But my sister swore it didn't sound like wind. She said it sounded human. I still don't know what to think about it. Part of me wants to believe there's a logical explanation for every piece of it. Uneven tables, old pipes, animals in the walls, wind, stress, imagination. All of that is possible. But when you put everything together, the sliding glass, the footsteps upstairs, The locked room opening on its own, the scratching, the chair, and the crying outside at night. It becomes harder to brush off completely. I may ask my sister if she remembers more, because this story was told to me a long time ago, and I'm sure there are details I've forgotten. But even with the gaps, that house has always felt like one of those places where something was just slightly wrong, quietly waiting for someone to notice. I'm not exactly sure when this first happened. It feels like it was several years ago, but around Christmas of 2024, the memory started coming back to me more clearly. I remember deciding to take a nap on the couch one afternoon. The sun was bright, and I left the curtains open because I wanted to feel the warmth on me while I slept. Then I woke up, but I wasn't on the couch anymore. I was lying on a cold table, still in the same position I had fallen asleep in. In front of me stood this tall, mantis-like being, and around it were several small, gray figures. I was terrified. I tried to panic, tried to move, but I couldn't. I had experienced sleep paralysis before, twice actually, so part of me wanted to explain it that way. But this felt different, much different. I squeezed my eyes shut and begged myself to wake up. All the communication happened without speaking. It was like the voice was inside my head. The mantis-like being told me, sharply at first, to calm down. It said they were there to help me. Then it told me my heart needed help, and it asked if it could remove a small part of my hand. That broke whatever fragile calm I had left. I opened my eyes and shouted, "No!" The being seemed irritated, almost disappointed. Then it lifted one long finger, or claw, I can't remember exactly, and held it over my body. It never touched me, but somehow, it started cutting me open. There was no pain, no blood, just this faint tingling feeling, like something passing through me without resistance. When I looked down, my body was open, pale and bloodless, almost like a body in a morgue. I shut my eyes again, desperate to wake up, desperate for it to be over. The voice came back, calmer this time, and told me it was already done. I didn't want to look, but eventually I opened my eyes. There was no scar, nothing visible at all. Then the being told me they had removed most of the blood clots, but not all of them. It said there were parts they couldn't reach because my hand had been resting over my chest. I remember getting angry and asking, "Why didn't you just move it?" The voice changed then. It stopped sounding gentle. It became firm, almost stern. It told me this was exactly what humans were like. We accept a tremendous gift, refuse to give up even something small in return, and then still complain about what wasn't done perfectly. It said that if they had tried to move my hand, they might have torn off my whole arm. Then it told me I needed to see a good medical professional. It said there were still blood clots left, and if I ignored them, cerebral venous sinus thrombosis could cause a major stroke. It said I could end up in a wheelchair. And then I woke up. I wanted to forget it immediately. For a while, I tried to. But here's the part I can't quite shake. Ever since puberty, and I'm 34 now, I've always sweated easily. I wasn't extremely fit, but I wasn't overweight either. Years later, it was still bothering me enough that I finally made a doctor's appointment. The answer was basically that I was healthy, and sweating by itself wasn't really a symptom that needed medical treatment. So I tried to accept that. Later on, I started noticing this tight, constricting feeling in my chest. It wasn't pain exactly, more like a pressure that made me feel like I needed to take a deep breath to clear it. But taking a deep breath almost never helped. Sometimes it made me even more aware of the tightness. So I went to the doctor again. Again, everything seemed fine. I do have a slightly raised chest area with a shallow dip down the middle. My doctor called it a very mild funnel chest. I wanted that explanation to be enough, and for a while, I think it was. I don't know whether I had been focusing on the sensation too much before, or whether I started ignoring it too much afterward. About a year ago, I finally started working out. Physically, I feel better than I can ever remember feeling. But whenever I break even the slightest sweat, my heart feels like it's racing. Recently, we had a hiking day at work. Other people were walking, talking, drinking, even smoking, and I was just trying to focus on my breathing. And 2 years ago, my mother passed away suddenly from heart-related issues. So now I keep thinking about that dream, or whatever it was. I know how it sounds. I really do. But the strange thing is, that experience felt more caring than some of the medical appointments I've had. Frightening, yes, but not cruel. It felt like a warning. And now I'm left wondering how to ask for a thorough heart check without sounding completely irrational. Because maybe it was only a dream, but it's the kind of dream that keeps tapping on the glass, asking to be taken seriously. I'm not really sure how to explain this, or even where to begin. Ever since I was very young, I've had moments where it felt like I wasn't fully in control of myself. Not all the time, just these sudden, strange breaks where I do something completely out of character, and then come back to myself afterward feeling horrified. One of the earliest times I remember, I was around 5. I suddenly picked up a heavy stick and heard a small animal in the yard. The second it was over, it was like I woke up. I started crying because I couldn't understand why I had done it. It didn't feel like a decision I made. There were other moments too. I'd stop whatever I was doing, grab paper, and start writing symbols or words in a language I didn't recognize. At the time, I thought it was just nonsense. Years later, I looked at some of it again and realized a few marks looked strangely close to real characters and words, some of them connected to dark or religious meanings. That scared me because I had no reason to know any of that as a child. I didn't grow up around those languages, and no one in my family knew them either. As I got older, things didn't really stop. They changed. I started noticing things moving when they shouldn't. Small objects sliding or falling. Sometimes something would be thrown across the room. My bed has shaken for no reason more than once, and I've heard voices when no one was there. The part that makes it harder to dismiss is that other people have seen and heard things around me too. So when I tell myself maybe I'm imagining it, I remember that I'm not always the only witness. The dreams are probably the worst part. I've had this recurring dream where something bright, almost like a living light, is chasing me. It tells me I can't escape, and then it goes after the people I love. Around the same time, my mother woke up screaming from a nightmare where something was trying to take me away. She said when she tried to get up and check on me, something pushed her back down. She felt pinned there, like she couldn't breathe. Another dream stayed with me for a long time. I was trapped in a place that felt like hell, and there was this enormous demon-like figure hurting me. It kept telling me I shouldn't have come back. Eventually, it let me go. But before it did, it threw me to the ground so hard that both of my legs broke in the dream. When I woke up, my legs hurt so badly I could barely walk for days. The most recent dream was different. I was lying in bed and something was above me, almost like a screen. It showed numbers and letters that kept shifting. When I finally focused on it, I saw a name, Abezethebo. I had never heard it before. There were numbers too, but I can't remember them now. What I do remember is a voice telling me not to forget the information. And there's something else I don't think was a dream. Sometimes I wake up with the feeling that someone is lying on top of me. Not violently, almost gently. I'll feel a hand brushing my hair, and I'll hear soft whispering. The words don't make sense, but the tone feels kind. The voice sounds like the same one from that first dream. I think it sounds like a woman, though though I'm not completely sure. I also have dreams about the future sometimes. Not vague ones either. They end up being strangely accurate. I get déjà vu constantly, and there are moments where if I truly believe something is going to happen, it does. I know how that sounds, but it's happened enough that I can't ignore it anymore. The strangest part is that I often wake up from these dreams with bruises, scratches, or pain I can't explain. I'm almost always sick in some way too, like my body is carrying something I don't understand. I'm not saying I know what this is. I don't. That's why I'm talking about it now. I just need an honest answer. I need someone to hear me without laughing or brushing it off. I don't know if this is spiritual, psychological, something paranormal, or something else entirely. I only know that I feel like something has been close to me for most of my life, and I'm scared that if I don't understand it soon, I'm going to lose the few people I can still talk to about it. I have lived in the UK my whole life, and I bought this house back in 2001 when I was in my mid-20s. It's not an especially old house, really. I think it was built sometime in the 1960s, so it's not ancient or anything like that. The people who owned it before me were a married couple with 2 children, a boy and a girl. From what I understood, the house had originally belonged to the husband's parents. When I first came to view it, I remember thinking the place felt very tired. The decorating was badly outdated, and the whole house had this neglected feeling to it. Not filthy exactly, but it was obvious that proper cleaning and care had fallen by the wayside for quite a long time, even though the family was still living there. Not too long after I moved in, I ran into the previous owner while I was out shopping. Her name was Linda, or at least that's what I'll call her. We got talking, and it turned out they hadn't moved far at all. They'd gone about a mile away, into a house that had belonged to her parents after they passed. During that conversation, she told me a little about why they had sold the place. One of the reasons stayed with me. Apparently, her husband's father had redecorated the house shortly before his wife died. Then, after he passed away too, the husband refused to change anything. He wanted to keep the house exactly as it was, almost like a memorial to his parents. And because he refused to redecorate, Linda refused to keep up with the cleaning. I don't know for certain whether they had all lived there together while his parents were still alive, but I always had the impression they might have. Naturally, once I owned the place, I redecorated the whole house. While stripping wallpaper, I found dates and costs written directly on the walls underneath. A lot of them were from the late 1970s and early 1980s, which made the house feel strangely layered, like it had been keeping little records of itself. For years, nothing unusual happened. Then, sometime around 2014, my ex and I started getting the sense that something wasn't quite right in the house. It was never anything dramatic. No doors flying open, no voices calling our names, nothing like that. It was smaller than that, which in some ways made it easier to dismiss. We'd hear odd noises from the kitchen now and then. Sometimes things seemed to be in slightly different places from where we'd left them. The kitchen light would occasionally flicker on or off. At the time, I explained most of it away. The ground floor is made of floorboards, and there's a gap of about a foot between them and the foundations, so I assumed temperature changes could be causing the wood to shift. The heating system was newer, and I thought the pipes might be expanding and contracting in colder months. The wiring had been done a couple of years before I bought the house, but I wouldn't exactly call the work perfect. The house itself isn't brilliantly built either. The outer walls aren't very square. There's no cavity insulation. And because I live in a small village on a hill in quite an exposed area, the wind can really get around the place. So, for a while, I had a neat little explanation for everything. But then came the feeling of being watched. That was harder to explain. Both of us started noticing it. You'd be sitting there and suddenly feel as though someone had stepped into the room behind you, even when you knew perfectly well nobody had. Every now and then we'd catch shadows or tiny movements out of the corner of our eyes. Of course, when we turned to look, there was never anything there. That went on for a year or two. Then it either stopped or we just got used to it and stopped noticing. My ex and I split up in 2016, and after that, I didn't really experience anything similar for a long time. But lately, I'm starting to wonder if it's happening again. My current partner has never mentioned anything, so maybe it's just my own mind doing strange little shadow puppets in the dark. Over the last year, though, we've been working opposite shifts, which means I'm often home alone at night. In the front room, there's a desk against the wall to my left, and on it, I have a large smart TV that I use as a computer monitor. When the screen is off, it acts almost like a dark mirror. It faces toward the kitchen doorway. Over the last year or so, I've often thought I've seen a shadow reflected in that screen, always in my peripheral vision, never directly. The moment I look properly, there's nothing there. At night, I sometimes notice something similar near the kitchen. Light spills from the kitchen into the dining area of the front room because there's a doorway there, but no actual door. Now and then, I'll think I've seen something interrupt that light, just a quick darkening at the edge of my vision. Again, I've tried to explain it away. Maybe I'm concentrating on the television or my laptop, and my eyes are adjusting badly between the bright screen and the darker room. That sounds reasonable enough. But the last few nights have been different. I've started hearing noises from one of the food cupboards in the kitchen. It's a lower cupboard under the counter, and it mostly has tins, jars, and some bags of pasta in it. The noise sounds like a cracking or clicking sound, almost as if something is nibbling or pressing against something inside. At first I thought, right, that'll be a mouse or a rat. My neighbors keep chickens, and where there are chickens, there are often rats. So it wouldn't be impossible for one to have found its way into the house somehow. But when I opened the cupboard, there was nothing there. No chewed packets, no droppings, no scratching, no scurrying, no sign of anything living in there at all. Just the noise. Then I started hearing something tapping against the metal Venetian blind in the kitchen as well. A small, sharp tapping sound. Not constant, but enough to make you pause and listen. Earlier tonight, the cracking noise started again. As soon as I went into the kitchen, it stopped. I stood there for a while, just listening, and after a bit it started again while I was still in the room. I quickly opened the cupboard, expecting to finally catch whatever it was. There was nothing inside. Nothing that I could see anyway. I am going to put down a rodent trap because that's the sensible thing to do. I'm not leaping straight to ghosts or anything. But I'll be honest, it feels odd. If it's a rodent, why is there no sound of it running away? Why is nothing chewed? Why are there no signs at all? I wouldn't say I'm a firm believer in the paranormal. I've never personally seen anything that would make me absolutely certain. But I do have an interest in it. I've watched paranormal channels online over the years. A lot of them are obviously fake, but I also watch a few where they try hard to debunk what they find. And every so often, they come across something they can't quite explain. So that's where I am with it. Maybe it's a rat. Maybe it's the house settling. Maybe it's my eyes and ears making stories out of ordinary things. But when you're alone at night, and something starts cracking inside a cupboard that turns out to be empty, ordinary explanations don't feel quite as comforting as they should. I've got to tell you, this whole thing has stayed with me in a way I can't really shake. Most of what's happened in our home over the past few years has centered around the hallway. I don't know why that spot exactly, but it always seems to come back to that narrow stretch between the rooms, like something there wants to be noticed. A little while ago, I was coming out of the bathroom late at night, and at the far end of the hall, near my bedroom and my son's room, I saw someone or something, standing there. It looked like a full figure, pale and still, almost draped in this soft, off-white shape. For a second or two, it was completely clear to me. Then it vanished. What shook me most wasn't only what I saw, it was how I felt. I'm not someone who startles easily. I've spent years riding motorcycles, and that teaches you how to stay calm when something sudden happens. You learn to keep panic out of the driver's seat. But this was different. The fear hit me instantly, right in the chest. It was deep, physical, the kind of fear that makes your whole body go cold before your mind can even catch up. I stood there trying to steady myself, wondering why the sight of it carried that much dread. It didn't move. It didn't rush me. It just stood there, and somehow that made it worse. It felt aware. That's the only way I can put it. I caught my breath, waited for my heart to slow down, and then I went straight to tell my son what I'd seen. A few days later, I was out working, and right in the middle of the day, I got this strong, nagging feeling that I needed to check on him. It came out of nowhere. I remember thinking, I should call him right now. But the day got away from me, and I never made the call. When I got home that evening, we talked, and figured out that around that same time, he'd been sitting at his computer in the living room when he heard heavy footsteps moving down the hallway. Not light creaks, not the house settling. Heavy steps, clear enough to pull his attention away from the screen, which, honestly, is a small miracle in itself. After that, things went quiet for a bit, but only on the surface. The feeling never really left. You know that sensation of being watched, of someone just out of sight around a corner? It was like that. Not all the time, but often enough to wear on you. Then one evening, I went out to pick up a few groceries. It was dark by the time I got back. I pulled up outside, got off the bike, and while I was unstrapping the bags, I thought I saw a dark figure standing on the lawn, just watching me from a short distance away. I did what I usually do when something feels too strange to be true. I told myself I was imagining it and went inside. The moment I stepped through the door, my son told me he'd just seen a ghost in the hallway. He said it had been standing behind the armchair, beneath a novelty mask I keep hanging on the wall. He only saw it for a split second, but he knew it was there. He was sure of it, and the truth is, this wasn't the beginning. Before any of these sightings, we'd already had years of strange things happening. Small objects would disappear and then turn up again. Cardboard roll inserts would get flicked off the windowsill. A door once slammed over and over on a still, hot afternoon with no wind at all. There were other moments too, unsettling ones. The sort of things you try to explain away because the alternative is harder to live with. But now it feels like whatever was once just noise in the background has become more visible, more deliberate. That's the part I keep coming back to. It feels as though it's becoming clearer. First it was sounds, movements, impressions, then footsteps, then a pale figure, then another sighting with more shape, more color, more presence. That progression is what unsettles me most. Part of me wants to set up my phone overnight, maybe run an audio app and see if it catches anything. Another part of me really doesn't want to know. I've thought about getting a couple of cheap cameras just to see what happens when no one's around. I've even wondered whether there's anyone nearby, maybe here in Tasmania, who actually investigates these things properly. But for now, this is where we are. I'm telling you exactly as it happened, because once you've seen something like that in your own home, it's hard to pretend it's nothing. And when your son sees it too, that's when it stops feeling like imagination and starts feeling like you're living alongside something you don't understand at all. I need to tell you about something that's been building for a while, because honestly, I've been trying to brush it off, explain it away, pretend it was stress or bad sleep or just my mind playing tricks on me. But after what happened tonight, I can't really do that anymore. For the past few years, there have been odd little things in this house. Nothing constant, nothing dramatic enough to make me feel certain. Just those strange moments that leave you unsettled afterward. A sound in the wrong place. A knock that doesn't fit. That sort of thing. But in the last couple of weeks, it's all felt stronger somehow. More deliberate. And tonight, I'm almost sure I saw something in the hallway. About a week ago, I was lying in bed, right on the edge of sleep, when I suddenly heard a woman's voice say, very softly, "Hello." It came from the space beside my bed, between me and the wall. It wasn't part of a dream. It startled me so sharply that I sat upright straight away and stared at the exact spot the voice seemed to come from. I was fully awake in an instant, heart pounding, just trying to make sense of it. Then there have been the knocks. A few loud bangs late at night, the kind that make you stop and listen because they're so clear and so out of place. A couple of them happened when the whole street was quiet. No traffic, no people outside, nothing obvious that could explain them. Once or twice, my son, Leon, didn't hear them at all, even though they sounded loud enough that he should have. Then, 2 nights ago, I walked past Leon's room and noticed his bedroom door was wide open. He was asleep in bed, and I remember noticing the door because I nearly always clock little things like that. Not even half a minute later, I came back down the hall and the door was shut. Completely shut. I knocked and asked him if he'd gotten up and closed it, and he told me, still half asleep, that he hadn't moved. That unsettled me. But what happened tonight is what really got to me. Leon usually stays up absurdly late gaming and doesn't go to bed until the early morning. Tonight, he headed into his room not long before all this happened. I was already exhausted because my laptop had been acting strangely all day, draining its battery over and over, even though it was plugged in and supposedly charging. It's not something it normally does, and by that point, I was already worn down and irritable. Then there was this fly. One of those relentless little things that just will not leave you alone, landing on my foot, then my cheek, then buzzing back again like it pays rent. I finally got fed up, reached down beside the bed, and dug out the fly swatter I keep tucked away. I managed to kill it, and right as I did, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye through my partly open bedroom door. I saw Leon come out of his room and head down the hallway toward the bathroom. It looked completely ordinary at first. The only thing that struck me as slightly odd was that he seemed to be wearing a dark blue oversized hoodie or blanket thing, which made no sense because his room gets so warm at night. A moment later, I stepped into the hallway myself because I thought there might be more flies out there. Sure enough, there was another one, and I swatted that too. While I was standing there, I called down the hall to Leon, joking that the fly swatter was doing a better job than bug spray ever could. He didn't answer, but when I opened the door, Leon was there in bed. Not standing up. Not getting settled. Not halfway across the room. In bed. Asleep. Or at least asleep enough that opening the door woke him. And that was the exact moment every bit of confidence I had in what I'd seen just fell apart. Because I know what I saw. I saw someone leave that room and walk down the hallway. I was close enough to recognize the shape, the movement, even what looked like the clothing. And yet my son had never left the bed. I just stood there frozen, and this awful cold feeling washed over me. It hit me all at once that whatever I saw in that hallway was not Leon. And that's what's shaken me so badly. I've tried to be rational about everything else, but this felt different. It felt clear, real. And I honestly don't know how to explain it away anymore. You know those nights that start out feeling ordinary, almost playful, and then somehow turn into something you can't quite explain later? That's what this was. Earlier that evening, around a little after 8, I picked up a girl I've really been enjoying spending time with. I'll call her Maya. We ended up driving around together for hours, just talking, laughing, and taking those quiet back roads that seem to stretch forever at night. We live out in Seminole County, Oklahoma, and if you've ever been through places like that, you know how the dark feels different there. It's not city dark. It's wide open, still, and old. At first, we stopped by a cemetery for a while, mostly just to sit and soak in the silence. Strangely enough, it didn't feel creepy at all. It actually felt calm, almost comforting. But after a bit, we both agreed we wanted something a little more exciting, so we drove out to this old place people around here call Whisper Bridge. Now, I'd been there before. Plenty of times, actually. Friends, random late-night drives, even once with Maya before. Nothing unusual had ever happened. That's probably why we didn't think much of it when we parked and stepped out. But this time felt different almost right away. The second our boots hit the ground, we both got that feeling. You know the one, where the air suddenly feels heavier and your skin goes tight for no real reason. Neither of us said much at first, because we both felt weird things before and figured maybe we were just letting the mood get to us. We walked out onto the bridge, stepping carefully over the old metal framework. Off to one side, in the overgrown brush, we heard rustling. It wasn't loud, and honestly, we brushed it off because we'd already seen a possum near the entrance when we pulled up. So we kept going. We stopped for a while and looked over the side. There wasn't much water under us, mostly mud and a thin, sluggish stream because of the summer heat. The night itself was warm, not hot exactly, just one of those late Oklahoma nights where the air clings to you a little. We stood near the middle of the bridge talking, enjoying the quiet, and for a moment it actually felt peaceful. Then we heard it. A sharp little metallic ting. It came from one of the support beams near the edge of the bridge, the kind of sound metal makes when it's been struck just right. We both froze. Then, trying to be rational, we went to check it out. We looked around, listened, and couldn't find anything that should have caused it. No loose chain, no rock falling, no animal bumping into anything. So we tested it ourselves. We tapped the beam with our fingers, and sure enough, it made almost the exact same sound. That should have made us feel better, I guess. Like, mystery solved. Except it didn't. If anything, it made us more nervous, because now we knew the sound had been deliberate enough to notice. We stayed there a little longer anyway, mostly because neither of us wanted to be the first to admit we were getting rattled. We still had that little sense of safety you get when you're not alone, when someone else is standing beside you feeling it too. Then came the part I still can't explain. From the woods nearby, we heard what started as a coyote call. At first, that didn't seem strange. Coyotes are common out here. But halfway through the sound, it changed. Smoothly, naturally. It shifted into something like an owl call, except it wasn't any owl sound either of us had ever heard before. It wasn't right. That's the only way I know how to say it. It sounded wrong in a way that hit me before I could even think. The second we heard it, both of us ran. Growing up in Oklahoma, you hear stories. Old ones. Tribal stories. Mourning stories. The kind people don't always say too much about, because even naming certain things feels like inviting them closer. I'm not trying to claim I know exactly what we encountered. Maybe there's a perfectly normal explanation buried somewhere in all of it. But deep down, I don't think either of us believes that's what it was. What I do know is that something about that place felt aware of us that night. And whether it was something spiritual, something natural we couldn't identify, or just one of those moments where the world suddenly feels much stranger than you thought, it stayed with me. I've had other experiences before, some gentler, some even comforting in their own strange way. This one wasn't like that. This one felt like a warning. Anyway, that's the story. I'm still turning it over in my mind, still wondering what exactly we heard out there on that bridge. But I can tell you this for sure. I've been there before without a second thought, and I don't think I'll ever walk onto it that casually again. You know, my friend Scotty Schaefer and I have been close since we were about 4 years old. We're both pushing 40 now, and even though life has done what life always does, moved us to different states, gave us wives, kids, jobs, all the usual chaos, we still make time to fish bass tournaments and go hunting together a few times a year. We've always shared gear, stories, and probably too many bad decisions. One thing we never agreed on, though, was the whole idea of ghosts and the afterlife. Scotty always believed there was more out there. I was the one who rolled my eyes and came up with practical explanations for every strange thing he ever told me. That was just our rhythm. So this happened during tournament season last spring. I had to miss one of the events because I was working late at the hospital during my pharmacy rotation. Since our big tackle box was in my boat, I told Scotty I'd swing by after work and leave it in his garage so he and the alternate guy could head out early the next morning. To picture the place, Scotty had this older ranch-style house with a big yard, and behind it, off the alley, there was a detached one-car garage. Right next to it lived his elderly neighbor, Merlin, who was one of those people you instantly liked. He was a veteran, loved good scotch, had a dry sense of humor, and always had something funny to say if you ran into him by the driveway or near his garden. I remember pulling in at 12:17 a.m. exactly. It was warm out, quiet, and honestly, kind of peaceful. I was tired, but I was in a decent mood. And just so I'm being clear here, because I know how stories like this sound, I was completely sober. I'd just come off a long shift. The second I stepped into Scotty's garage, something changed. I've never had an experience like it before or since. Every hair on my arms and legs stood up all at once, like I'd walked through some massive burst of static. My skin broke out in goosebumps so hard it actually hurt. And underneath that was this awful, crushing feeling of dread. Not nerves, not anxiety. I mean the absolute certainty that something was terribly wrong. It hit me so suddenly it felt like somebody flipped a switch in my brain. Then, right on top of that, my body went into full panic mode. My heart was pounding, I was sweating, and I suddenly had to pee so badly it felt painful. I dropped the tackle box right by the garage entrance and bolted into the backyard. I barely made it maybe 15 feet before I had to stop. And this is the part I still can't explain. While I was standing there, out of the corner of my eye, I saw Merlin at the back corner of the garage, near where it met the alley. At first I thought, oh no, this poor man just caught me peeing in the yard. But when I turned and looked at him, I knew something was wrong. It looked like him, I'm sure of that. But his face, I still hate thinking about it. His eyes looked huge and dark, like hollow black spaces, and he was gripping the corner of the garage with one hand, leaning around it like he was trying to hide. The expression on his face was pure terror. His mouth was half open, twisted downward, like he was shocked and frightened at the same time. It chilled me in a way I still can't really put into words. I finished up as fast as I could and ran toward him, calling his name. Part of me wanted to apologize. Part of me wanted to make sure he was okay. But when I got to the corner, nobody was there. I checked his side of the property, looked around the yard, the alley, everywhere I could in those few seconds. Nothing. So now I'm rattled, trying to keep it together. and I turn back toward the garage. That's when I notice the light is on inside, and there's this loud, aggressive knocking sound coming from in there. It sounded almost like a power tool stuttering or something mechanical slamming over and over. I went back in, half out of fear and half because I needed some kind of explanation for any of this. I found the source of the noise almost immediately. It was the foot-controlled trolling motor on Scotty's boat. It was somehow running hard while still folded up on the deck, and the prop was smacking against the plywood. The weirdest part was that the control still looked like it was in the off position. I had to disconnect the battery to make it stop. And the light? That wasn't a switch on the wall. It was one of those pull cord lights hanging deeper inside the garage. I know I hadn't turned it on. I'd barely gotten through the doorway before I ran back out. I checked the garage one more time, just to make sure no one was in there, turned off the light, and got out as fast as I could. I sat in my car shaking and called Scotty. I left him this rambling voicemail telling him everything that had just happened. I remember the call time because I stared at it afterward. It was 12:25 a.m. About 15 minutes later, Scotty called me back. He told me there were fire trucks and emergency vehicles at Merlin's house. Then he said Merlin's son had been there, and according to him, Merlin had collapsed at the kitchen table at exactly 12:17 a.m. He'd been in the middle of a sentence, talking about a terrible headache and whether he should go to the hospital. Then he just died. It turned out to be a massive aneurysm. His son said it happened so fast he was likely gone before he even hit the table. That was the exact moment I pulled into the driveway. The exact moment that wave of dread hit me. The exact moment I thought I saw him standing behind Scotty's garage, looking more frightened than any face I have ever seen in my life. I spent years dismissing every ghost story Scotty ever told me. I always needed a logical answer, something I could file away and explain. But I've never been able to explain that night. And honestly, even now, telling it to you still gives me chills. So, I want to tell you about something strange that happened to me and my friend last week at the St. James Hotel in Red Wing, Minnesota. Not the one people always mix it up with, but the historic one. The old hotel that's been standing there since the 1800s. It's gorgeous, honestly. Very elegant, very old-fashioned. The kind of place that feels charming the second you walk in. When we arrived, everything seemed normal. We checked in, grabbed our bags, and stepped into the elevator to go up to our room on the second floor. I clearly remember pressing the button for 2. We stood there waiting, talking casually, and then the doors opened. But instead of the second floor, we were on the third. I turned to my friend right away and asked, "Didn't you see me hit the second floor?" She looked just as confused as I felt, and said the only button she saw lit up was for the third floor. That immediately threw us off. We didn't get out, just stood there staring. The hallway looked wrong. The walls had this dark patterned wallpaper, kind of burgundy and navy with an old Victorian style to it, and the lighting was so dim it made everything feel heavy. Not just dark, but unsettling. It was like the whole floor had this stale, eerie feeling that pressed in on you. We kind of laughed it off at first because what else do you do when something weird happens and you don't know what to make of it? I pressed the second floor button again, and this time the elevator took us where we meant to go. When the doors opened, the second floor had a similar old-fashioned look, but it felt more normal. The lights were brighter, and there was a large mirror along the wall that made the hallway feel more open. So we went to our room and tried to settle in. Later on, I told my friend I wanted to go back up and explore the third floor. I'd read before our trip that people say that floor is especially active, and that room 310 is tied to a spirit named Clarissa, whose presence is still felt there. My friend was not thrilled by the idea, which, honestly, fair. But after I kept insisting, she finally agreed to come with me. This time, before we got into the elevator, I pulled out my phone and started recording. I wanted proof in case anything happened again. The elevator went up, the doors opened, and both of us just froze. The walls were white, not patterned, not dark, not Victorian looking at all, just plain white walls. I remember staring and feeling my stomach drop because I knew what we had seen the first time. My friend knew it too. We both started panicking a little, trying to make sense of it, whispering to each other like somehow speaking too loudly would make it worse. We got back into the elevator and checked another floor, thinking maybe we'd mixed something up. But that hallway also had white walls. We even tried another button, but the elevator wouldn't go where we wanted, so we went back to the third floor one more time just to be sure. Still white walls. At that point, we rode back down to our floor completely shaken. We just stood there in the hallway talking in circles, trying to explain something that neither of us could explain. We both knew we had seen that darker wallpaper before. We both felt how strange that floor had been the first time. And yet, when we went back with my phone recording, it was like that version of the hallway had vanished. I know how unbelievable it sounds. I get it. But when you're standing there with someone else who saw it too, and both of you know what you experienced, it stays with you. Even now, I can still picture that first hallway in my mind, dim and unnervingly still, like we briefly opened the door to somewhere else. Let me tell you about the gym I work at, because honestly, I still can't quite make peace with what's happened there. The building itself isn't ancient or anything dramatic like that. It's been around a while, maybe a few decades, but it's still solid. It used to be an old racket club with courts downstairs and a fitness room above, and now it's been converted into a full gym. You can still see traces of what it used to be, especially in the downstairs weights area where the old court markings and wall angles are still visible. The pool, showers, and changing rooms are tucked off a side corridor, and the rest of the gym sits upstairs beyond this open wooden staircase. During the day, it feels completely normal, familiar even. But at night, it becomes something else. There have been a few moments that really got under my skin. The first one happened maybe 5 months ago. I'd already been home for a while when my manager called and said one of the alarms had gone off at the gym. I lived closest, so I went back to check it out. When I got there, I found the issue pretty quickly. One of the poolside doors hadn't latched properly. Before fixing it, I did a full sweep of the place, just to be safe. Reception was empty. Upstairs was empty. The women's changing room was empty. I went through to the pool area, shut the door properly, checked the plant room, checked the men's changing room, and glanced into the weights area too. Nothing. No one. Then, as I was heading back toward reception, I heard someone shout behind me. Not angry, not panicked, just like someone calling out casually to another person across the room. At the same time, I caught this dark shape in the corner of my vision, and then I heard the men's showers come on. I ran straight toward the sound. Adrenaline does that to you, I suppose. But when I got there, everything was exactly as I'd left it. No movement, no footsteps, no doors swinging. No one could have slipped past me without being seen. The corridors are too narrow, the layout too tight. I was completely alone. Then a couple of nights later, 2 coworkers had their own experience during closing. They'd checked every section properly, made sure all the members were gone, and started shutting things down at reception. That's when they heard voices coming from down the corridor, and then the sound of locker doors banging shut in the men's changing room. So they called out, thinking maybe someone had been missed. It happens, people linger, but when they checked, there was nobody there. They walked back toward reception, and just as they got close, they heard it again. Same voices, same locker noise, same empty room when they checked. They locked up fast after that and got out. Then there was the one that happened to me and another coworker on an afternoon close. We'd done everything by the book. Cleared the building, shut the doors, put away the tills, tidied the weights so carefully that there was nothing left loose on the floor. And then we heard this loud metallic clang from the downstairs weights room. You know that sound when someone re-racks a heavy barbell or drops a plate onto a machine? It was exactly that. Sharp, heavy, unmistakable. We both knew it instantly. We went down right away, because what else do you do when your brain still wants reality to behave itself? But the room was empty. The fire doors were secured. No plates had fallen. No bars were out of place. Nothing looked disturbed at all. We just looked at each other, silently confirming that yes, we had both heard the same thing. And then we left. On the way out, we heard voices again. This time, neither of us bothered checking. And those weren't even the only incidents. There were also the taps. One of our cleaners was working alone one evening and filled a bucket from the hot tap in the little kitchen area, same as she always does. A few minutes later, she heard water running again and went back in to find both taps blasting full force. She never uses both and never turns them up that high because they splash everywhere. It's possible she made a mistake, obviously. People make mistakes all the time. Still, it rattled her. Another time, one of my coworkers heard a tap running during final checks and eventually tracked it down to a locked cleaning cupboard. No members in the building. No cleaner on site yet. Just water running behind a locked door for no reason anyone could explain. Then there was the fire door in the plant room. That one really got me. A coworker was doing routine checks in there. The door is heavy, coated, and designed like it belongs in a bunker. We usually prop it open while we're inside. He was standing there, facing it, when it slammed shut. Not drifted shut, not slipped quietly off the prop. Slammed. Hard. That door does sometimes fall off the stopper, but when it does, it closes gently and usually doesn't even latch. This time it hit like someone had shoved it. We've had a few reports from members too, which somehow makes it worse. One man was training alone late in the weights area and saw a shadow move past the doorway into the next room. He thought it was a staff member coming to tell him it was closing time, so he waited. No one came. He checked the connected rooms himself. Empty. Another member heard the sound of weights being set down while he was walking between sets. He searched the whole area. Again, empty. And one man in the changing room heard voices, turned the corner expecting to find someone speaking to him, and instead only saw a locker door slowly swinging open by itself. That last detail stayed with me more than I'd like to admit. What bothers me is that I'm not someone who jumps to supernatural explanations. I'm careful, skeptical. I want there to be a logical reason for things. Echoes, plumbing, settling pipes, bad hinges, tired brains at the end of a shift, any of that. And honestly, some of it probably can be explained that way. But when the same kinds of noises keep happening, in the same places, heard by different people, over and over again, it starts to wear down your neat little rational framework. So that's my story. Or, I guess, that's Rowan's gym now, because it doesn't always feel like it belongs only to the living after dark. I still lock up. I still do the checks. I still tell myself there's an explanation for everything. But I'd be lying to you if I said I walk those corridors at night with the same confidence I used to. Something in that building doesn't quite feel empty when it should. I need to tell you about a place I used to work, because to this day, I still cannot explain what was happening there. It was a small shop, and from the beginning, it felt off. Doors would open and close on their own. Items would get moved around when nobody had touched them. More than once, I heard knocking on the bathroom door, even though I was the only person in the store. One night, the security camera was somehow turned upside down after closing. We checked it later, and the only way to move that camera was to physically lift it and reposition it. It was not something that could just shift by itself. One evening, I was alone closing up when I felt something grab me from behind. I spun around immediately, but no one was there. Another night, I heard a loud crash in the gift room at the back of the store. When I went to look, a glass cross had been flung clear across the room and shattered on the floor. It had moved way too far to have simply fallen. My coworkers and I eventually started calling whatever it was Errol, half joking, half not. A lot of strange things happened before the owners finally brought in a paranormal team. They said they made contact with several different entities, and because the owners were deeply religious, they had the whole store and property blessed afterward. Things did calm down a little after that, but they never completely stopped. The last thing that happened before I quit is still one of the clearest memories I have. I was alone again, closing the store. I knelt down to grab something from a cabinet, and I suddenly felt, and even saw, a dark figure lean over me. I thought someone had come up behind me, so I turned around fast, but there was nobody there. A little while later, I saw a shadowy figure moving through the aisles toward the walk-in fridge. I followed it, thinking maybe someone had somehow gotten into the store. I even stepped into the fridge to check. I had left the heavy door open behind me, and that door never moved unless you pushed it hard. I went all the way to the back, found no one there, and then the door slammed shut. A few months later, I moved to another town for school and stayed with a relative. My room was large, with its own bathroom and a walk-in closet. I always kept the closet door open because I had a mirror hanging on it. After I had been there a while, I started noticing what looked like a shadow standing inside the closet. Sometimes it even seemed to have reddish eyes. I kept telling myself I was tired and imagining it. Then one night, while I was driving home from work, I felt one of my braids get tugged sharply downward. I panicked and pulled over at a gas station as soon as I could. I searched the whole car, convinced for a second that someone had to be hiding in there, but there was no one. I even tried to explain it away by thinking maybe my hair had caught on the seatbelt, but it did not make sense from the side it was pulled. After that, the bathroom door in that house would open and close by itself. Lights would switch off right in front of me, not just go out, but the actual switch would move. Months later, after I graduated, I moved again for work and lived with roommates. They had a wall covered in crosses, and one day, one of them flew off and shattered on the floor in front of us. The bathroom door there also opened and closed on its own. Today, I decided to try speaking to whatever this is, instead of just being afraid of it. Over several nights, these were the words I heard. Don't force the arrangement. The realizations are deserted. Don't run again. Rejection is waiting for you. Then, in what sounded like a child's voice, I heard, Hallelujah, Candy, Lila. Another night, I said, I'm here, and I'm listening to what you have to say. And it answered, Here to say. I said, Yes, I'm here and listening to you. It said, Yes. I told it, You can say whatever you want. I'm listening. And it answered, Here, listening, yes. I said, Yes. Then it said, I don't know. I asked, What don't you know? It replied, I like chocolates, about last night. So I asked, What happened last night? And it said, I'm cold. Then it made a sound like a dog barking, and after that I heard, I like dogs. Then, in that same childlike voice, it said, Pick me up. I still do not know what has followed me from place to place, or if it really is the same thing at all. I just know that for years now, I have kept seeing it, hearing it, and feeling it. And no matter how much I try to reason through it, some part of me still feels like something has been trying to get my attention for a very long time. I wanted to share something that's been sitting with me for a while, because honestly, I still can't fully explain it. My husband and I moved into our first house in September last year, and it was such a special milestone for us. It's a brand new build, so no one had ever lived here before, which made me feel pretty at ease from the start. The house has always felt calm and comforting, never heavy or unsettling. A few weeks after we settled in, we lost our sweet cat after a long battle with cancer. She passed away at the vet, not in the house, but during her last stretch, she spent a lot of time resting in the upstairs spare room. Those last days were hard. Not too long after she was gone, both my husband and I started catching these little glimpses out of the corners of our eyes. It always looked like a small white shape near the top of the stairs, right outside that room. She was white, so naturally our minds went there. We never saw anything clearly, never straight on, just those quick side glances that make you stop and wonder if you really saw something at all. At first, I told myself it was probably just grief playing tricks on us. Then a couple of months ago, something stranger happened. I was halfway down the stairs talking to my husband, who was sitting in the living room, and right in the middle of answering me, he suddenly stopped and said, "Wait, there, behind you." He pointed up toward the wall near the staircase. At the exact same moment, our other cat darted over and started pawing anxiously at that spot, like she was trying to catch something. By the time I turned around, there was nothing there. My husband had goosebumps all over his arms and told me he'd seen a quick flash of light, almost like a sharp little wedge, shoot up the stairs. He's not dramatic, and neither am I, so I still tried to brush it off. I figured maybe it was some random reflection or just a weird moment. But the fact that our cat reacted too stayed in the back of my mind. Later on, my mom admitted she'd seen something similar when she was visiting. She said she noticed a strange reflective light near the top of the stairs one afternoon, but she kept it to herself because she didn't want to scare me. Even then, I didn't let myself lean too far into it, mostly because I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. Until I finally did. A few nights ago, I was sitting on the couch reading while my husband was nearby playing a game. I happened to glance up toward the window shades, and suddenly, this flash of light appeared. It hovered there for maybe 2 or 3 seconds. It didn't look like normal light to me. It had this curved shape, almost like a crescent or a bent wing, and it seemed so distinct that I just froze. Then I looked at my husband, and the second I saw his face, I knew. It was the same thing he'd been trying to describe before. We checked everything we could think of afterward. Lamps, windows, cars outside, anything that could have caused some odd reflection. Nothing made sense. I'm still trying to be reasonable about it because that's just how I'm wired. But I can't deny that it felt real, and now I understand why everyone else looked so unsettled when they saw it. I don't know if it's connected to our cat, or if it's something completely explainable that we just haven't figured out yet. I only know that it happened, and I can't stop thinking about it. I honestly need help, because I'm not sleeping, and I'm starting to feel afraid in my own home. For the past few weeks, I haven't been able to sleep in the dark, and the strange part is, I'm not someone who normally believes in anything supernatural. Neither is my husband. We've always been the kind of people who try to find a logical explanation for everything. But after everything that's been happening in our house lately, I don't know what to think anymore. It started with our smart speakers. They keep turning on by themselves and playing songs nobody in our house ever listens to. The only way they should activate is if someone taps them or uses the connected phone, and only one phone is linked to the system. More than once, the speaker in our bedroom has started blasting music in the middle of the night, like around 2 or 3 in the morning, at a volume we would never even use. One night, A friend was over and said she heard footsteps upstairs when no one else was up there. We went to check, and there was nobody there, but the kitchen speaker had started playing music on its own again. Then there was the laundry room. A stack of hampers and plastic bins suddenly crashed over all at once. No one was in there. Nothing had bumped them. Later, we even tried setting them up the same way to see if maybe they were just unstable, but we couldn't get them to fall like that unless someone physically shoved them. We've also heard footsteps upstairs when the whole upstairs was empty. We've heard cabinets shutting too, like someone was moving around in the kitchen when no one was there. One of the moments that really shook us happened to my husband. He was already in bed one night before I came upstairs, and he said he felt something moving across the mattress beside him. Not just a vague feeling, but actual pressure, like footsteps pressing into the bed. He told me he stayed still for a minute because he was scared, but also trying to make sense of it. He said whatever it was seemed to get closer and closer until it was near his face. The second he turned on the lamp, it stopped. When he switched the light back off, he said he felt it again. Another weird thing happened when a friend was at our house. She unlocked her car from inside, left her keys on the counter, and walked outside to grab something. Just as she got close to the car, it locked itself and the headlights flashed. Her car is older and definitely does not auto-lock like that. Then there was the front door. My husband unlocked it to let someone in, then went back upstairs. By the time the friend reached the door, it was locked again. Not just locked, but deadbolted. We never used the deadbolt during the day, so that really freaked us out. We've had lights flicker in random rooms too, and there doesn't seem to be any clear reason for it. And the thing I keep replaying in my head happened one night when we were driving home. I looked toward the front of the house and could have sworn I saw a figure standing in the window. At the time, I told myself I was just tired or imagining things. But after everything else, I can't brush it off so easily anymore. I just know I can't keep living like this. I want to tell you about something that stayed with me for years, and even now, talking about it still gets under my skin in a way I can't fully explain. When this happened, I'd been living in that house for around 10 years, maybe a little more. By the time I'm telling this now, it's been close to 13. It was one of those narrow 3-story townhouses that tries very hard to look fancy from the outside, complete with those useless little balconies no one could actually step onto. The layout matters, unfortunately, because the feeling was always tied to one exact spot. When you walked in through the front door, there was a small bathroom off to the left, the kitchen on the right, and the living room straight ahead. Just beside that first bathroom, the staircase started. From the bottom, if you looked up, you could see a section of white painted railing near the upstairs bathroom door. The stairs curved near the top, and when you reached the last step, my bedroom was directly ahead. My mom's office was nearby, along with a cupboard and my dad's study. It was an ordinary enough house, really. Nothing about it should have felt strange. But for as long as I can remember, there was one place that never felt right. A few years after we moved in, when I was still pretty young, I started feeling this presence at the top of that first staircase. Not just once in a while, not only at night, but constantly. It always seemed to be standing near the upstairs bathroom door, just beyond the railing, as if it were leaning slightly forward and looking down. Sometimes it felt distant, almost blank, like it was there without really noticing me. But most of the time, it felt focused, intentional. Every single time I came out of my room, I'd glance toward that spot without even thinking about it. I'd start down the stairs feeling mostly normal, but the second I hit that curve and my back turned toward the landing, the feeling would come over me. That unmistakable sensation that something was watching me. Not imagining it, not just being nervous. Watched. And it worked both ways. Going upstairs, going downstairs, daytime, nighttime, it didn't matter. Though I'll say this, at night it always felt worse, heavier, sharper. During the day, there were still moments when I'd hit a certain step and my whole body would go cold, and I'd rush the rest of the way just to get away from that part of the landing. The strange thing is, I never told anyone, not once. Part of it was embarrassment, I think. It unsettled me deeply, but saying it out loud made me feel childish, like I'd sound ridiculous. My best friend and I were both the sort of kids who were always expected to be sensible, high-achieving, composed. The kind of girls who were supposed to have their heads screwed on properly. And even though, logically, I knew feelings aren't stupid, I still couldn't bring myself to say, something at the top of my stairs feels wrong. My best friend, I'll call her Jame, used to stay over a lot when we both had free time. On the night I'm thinking of, we were probably 15, maybe 16, somewhere around then. We were having one of those really ordinary, happy evenings, talking nonsense, laughing, baking cookies, finishing the takeaway we'd ordered, cutting up fruit, half watching films in the living room. Just normal teenage stuff. She said hi in this oddly drawn-out way, and I answered, not thinking anything of it. Then she looked at me with this expression I still remember so clearly. She was half smiling, half frowning, like she already felt silly for what she was about to say. And then she said, very casually, "Mara, do you ever get the feeling that someone's watching you from the top of those stairs?" I froze. I mean, completely froze, because I had never said a word about it to her. Not hinted at it, not joked about it, nothing. And suddenly there it was, spoken out loud by someone else, the exact thing I had been carrying around in silence for years. I remember feeling two things at once. Absolute terror, just this cold shock right through me. But also relief, real relief, because for the first time I knew it wasn't only me. I wasn't alone in it. I wasn't imagining something out of nowhere. Jame told me she'd felt it before too, more than once, always in the same place, always around that landing near the bathroom. And when she described it, it matched what I'd been feeling all along. Same spot, same sense of being watched, same awful energy. Even now, telling you this, I get emotional in a way that's hard to put into words. It's not just fear, though there's definitely fear in it. It's something deeper than that. The whole thing, the years of feeling like there was something standing there, something maybe angry, maybe hostile, has stayed with me in a very profound way. I still feel it sometimes, and I still look at that spot, every single time. I do not remember much about my childhood, which is its own lovely little cruelty. But I remember that thing. I remember it with a clarity that makes my skin go cold even now. It started the same way every night. I would drift into this strange dream where I was high above the woods behind our house, looking down as if I were part of the sky itself. Below me, there was a woman walking alone through the trees. At first, I could only see the top of her head, but with every step she took, my view moved closer. Slowly, inch by inch, like something was drawing me toward her whether I wanted it or not. By the time she reached the edge of the woods, I was right above her. I could see her bare feet on the dirt path leading toward our house. Then my view would shift, and suddenly I was behind her, following her down our street. And then it changed again. I was seeing through her eyes. I would watch her step into our house, climb the stairs, and move toward my bedroom. And from inside her, or whatever it was, I could feel this terrible rage. Not anger the way people mean it. Something deeper, older. A kind of hatred so sharp and powerful it felt like it could split the walls apart. She would open my bedroom door, and there I was, just a little kid asleep in bed. That was the moment the dream ended. I would open my eyes thinking, thank God, it was only a dream. And every single time, I was wrong. It would be there, standing beside my bed, staring at me. I still hate describing it, but I want you to understand. It looked almost human in the way a wax figure almost looks alive. Its skin was pale and cracked, like dried porcelain or white clay left out in the heat. Its eyes were too wide, cloudy and bloodshot, like they hurt just from being forced open. The hair hung in thin, lifeless strands around its face. And the mouth. The mouth wore this smeared red lipstick, as if it had tried to dress itself up as something familiar and failed. When it smiled, I could see teeth like pins. Not normal teeth. Long, thin, needle-like things packed too tightly together. It loved my fear. I knew that even as a child. It would grin as if it had all the time in the world, and then it would drop down onto all fours and rush toward me. I screamed every night. My mother would come running, throwing the door open, and it would vanish before she could see it. Just gone. This happened so often that she tried everything. Doctors, counselors, sleep medication. She thought I was having night terrors. The neighbors heard me screaming so many times they called the police more than once. My poor mother was trying to keep the whole thing from becoming some family legend. But families are what they are, and the story spread anyway. By the time I was around 8, I was falling apart. My hair had started thinning. I barely ate. I did not laugh. I did not play. I was all nerves and bones and fear. Then my grandmother took me in for a night. She sat me down at her kitchen table without fussing, which somehow made it feel more serious. She put a bowl of soup in front of me, rested her hand over mine, and after a long silence, she said, very quietly, I used to call it sore eyes. I did not even look up, but I knew exactly what she meant. She said, do not give it anything to smile about. It is only made of mud and worms. And those needle teeth? They snap easy. She looked at the pieces and said, it breaks the same way. I asked her if she meant I was supposed to fight the thing, physically. She told me no. Then she explained it in a way only grandmothers can, as if she were telling me how to mend a shirt or salt a stew. She said that if I did not let it smile, it would break all on its own. The teeth sat too tight in its mouth. The eyes would swell. The whole thing would come apart. That night, for the first time in years, I fell asleep feeling safe. The dream came again, just as it always had. The woods, the woman, the walk to the house, the stairs, the bedroom. And then I woke to find it there. But this time, I remembered the shattered jar. I remembered the dirt and the worms. I remembered my grandmother's voice. And suddenly it did not look powerful anymore. It looked brittle. It lunged toward me a few times, trying to scare me, but I did not react. I just stared back at it. No tears, no screaming, no fear. I remember hearing my own little voice in that room, clear as a bell. I'm not scared of you anymore. It made this ugly sound, somewhere between a grunt and a hiss, and backed away. Then it left the room on all fours, moving in that awful, inhuman way. A moment later, my grandmother came in. She took me downstairs, wrapped me in a blanket, and made me drink a mug of warm goat's milk with cinnamon, which I thought was disgusting at the time. She kissed the top of my head, tucked me back in later, and after that, nobody spoke of it again. And for years, that was enough. I am 20 now. I moved to another city. I built a life I actually love. I have been with my partner Daniel for 3 years. We have a dog and a cat and a small, happy home. I have close friends. I laugh easily now. At 14, I told a therapist about what happened, and she thought it might have been stress, sleep paralysis, childhood trauma, all dressed up in nightmares. Maybe my grandmother just knew how to give me something symbolic to hold on to, and maybe that saved me. Honestly, for a long time, that explanation was enough too. Then, 2 weeks ago, it came back. The dream returned first. Same path, same house, same feeling. When I opened my eyes, it was in my room again, crouched low at the foot of the bed like a runner waiting for the signal to launch. I was not afraid, not at first. I remembered the jar. I remembered what my grandmother had taught me. So I looked at it and said, just like before, "I'm not scared of you." But this time it smiled wider than I had ever seen, wider than seemed possible. It gave this horrible, deep little laugh, and then it spoke. It had never spoken before. It said, "I know, not yet." Then it disappeared. The next morning, my mother called to tell me my grandmother had died during the night. I do not really have words for what that did to me. I am still grieving. Some hours I feel steady, and some hours I feel like the floor has dropped away. After the funeral, my mother and I went to clear out my grandmother's house. In the kitchen, there was spilled cinnamon on the counter and a carton of goat's milk left open, sour and leaking onto the floor. It looked as though she had been in the middle of something, or preparing for something. She had already packed many of her belongings into boxes. Inside one, she had left me her rings, some old jewelry, a beautiful antique box I used to admire as a child, silver picture frames from her wedding, a little cash, and one white ceramic jar. Beside it was a sealed bag of dried soil and worms. It said, "Stronger does not mean unbreakable." Since then, that thing has not stopped. The dreams keep coming. The feeling of it keeps finding me. I can feel it waiting, taunting, like it knows something I do not. And I am telling you this now because I do not know what else to do. I wish this were just a story from a frightened child. I really do. But it is back. And I think my grandmother spent her whole life keeping it from reaching me. I work nights at a small hospital in a quiet town called Willow Creek. It's the kind of place where a lot of older people come to spend their final years in peace. Most nights are simple. I clock in, get assigned a room, sit with a patient, and make sure they're comfortable and safe. A lot of the time, if they're sleeping, I'm just keeping watch while a video plays quietly on my phone. Easy work, at least on the surface. At first, nothing about the job felt unusual. Then one night, I was sitting with a patient who had been drifting in and out because of his medication. Out of nowhere, he looked at me and asked, very seriously, if I could hear the tapping. I took off my headphones and listened, but I heard nothing. He looked terrified. When I asked what he meant, he said someone was tapping on the window. We were on the second floor. There was no balcony, no ledge, nothing that would explain it. I told him I didn't hear anything, but he kept staring toward the glass like something was really there. A nurse eventually came in, calmed him down, gave him something to help him sleep, and the room went quiet again. The strange part was that it didn't happen just once. It happened again the next night, and the night after that. Always the same thing. He would hear tapping at the window, ask me if I heard it too, and panic when I said no. Not long after that, he passed away. I didn't think too much about it at first. In a place like this, death is sad, but it isn't rare. A few days later, I was called in again for another overnight shift. This time, I was assigned to an elderly woman who had just been admitted because her family could no longer care for her around the clock. She had dementia and drifted in and out of different memories. One minute she was telling me about being a girl in her family's garden. and the next she thought she was back in her own bedroom asking me to turn off the lamp. She was sweet, gentle, and easy to sit with. Around 2 in the morning, she woke up suddenly and sat straight up in bed. That alone startled me, because she'd been too weak to do that on her own earlier. She pointed toward the window and asked me, in this trembling voice, "What is that?" I turned and looked. Nothing. So I asked her what she saw. She said, "He's tapping. He wants me to open the window." The fear in her face was immediate, real. She started trying to climb out of bed even though she'd already been given medication to help her sleep. She was in no condition to walk, and the nurse had to come in and sedate her before she hurt herself. By morning, she was gone. After that, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. 2 different patients, different backgrounds, different conditions, different rooms, and both of them saw the same thing. Since then, I've kept doing my job, sitting through long nights and hoping no one else mentions the window. Tonight, though, something felt wrong from the moment I arrived. The hospital was unusually busy. Everyone seemed tense. Even one of the doctors made an offhand comment about the moon looking strange lately, like that explained the heaviness in the air. I'm not really someone who buys into things like that, and I try not to judge what other people believe, but still, the whole place felt off. My patient tonight was an older man named Harold. He had dementia too, but he was calmer than most and more aware than some of the others I've cared for. He'd also just had surgery, so by the time I started my shift, he was heavily sedated and resting. I settled in the way I always do, put on a video, opened a bag of snacks, cracked an energy drink, and got ready for a long night. Then, around midnight, the room turned freezing cold. That didn't make any sense. A little later, I started hearing footsteps in the hall. At first, I ignored them. Nurses are always moving around at night, especially when the floor is busy. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw someone walk into the room and reach toward the sink, like they were grabbing gloves or supplies. I turned to say something, expecting to see one of the staff. No one was there. I told myself I was tired. That's what I still wanted to believe. Night shifts do things to your eyes and your nerves. But then, as I turned back toward my chair, I looked at the window and saw what looked like the reflection of a person standing in the hall behind me. I just stared at it. I know that sounds ridiculous, but in that moment, I didn't know what else to do. It stood there, still as anything. I couldn't make out a face. It was just the outline of someone watching. When I finally turned around to catch whoever it was, the hallway was empty. Gone. And here's the strangest part. I wasn't exactly scared. I should have been, probably. Any reasonable person would be. But what I felt was something quieter than fear. More like the sense that I was sharing the room with something that didn't belong here, but also wasn't there to hurt me. It felt present, watching, waiting. That's why I'm telling you this now, because I don't know what that thing is. I don't know whether it's some kind of ghost or grief or the mind playing tricks in a place where death visits often. I only know that 2 dying patients saw someone tapping at the window, asking to be let in. And tonight, for the first time, I think I may have seen it too. And now I can't stop wondering whether it's just passing through or whether it's been waiting there all along. Let me tell you about something that happened to me one summer in July 2007, down in the south of England. Every year, my closest friend Malik and I would sneak away for one night of ghost hunting. That was the official excuse anyway. Really, it was our annual break from work, family chaos, and all the noise of ordinary life. We'd laugh, pack up our ridiculous gear, and go chasing stories neither of us fully believed. But this one trip, this one genuinely got under my skin. We'd done a bit of digging beforehand and decided to head out to a lonely stretch near Oxney Bottom, along the road between Deal and Dover in Kent. Before setting off, we stopped at a local pub for dinner, had a pint each, and mapped out where we wanted to walk that night. Now, whether it was because of all the equipment we were carrying, or because we obviously weren't locals, the barman suddenly looked at us and asked, "You two here for the ghost then?" We sort of smiled and admitted we were, and that was enough. The whole pub seemed to wake up. People who had clearly been listening in started leaning over, telling us bits and pieces about the famous Gray Lady. Most of it sounded like the usual handed-down local folklore, but one story really stayed with me. A man in his 40s told us that when he was a teenager, he and his mates used to stretch a washing line across the road and whip a white sheet from one side to the other whenever a car came past. He thought it was the funniest thing in the world, right up until the police got involved because too many terrified drivers had reported seeing a ghostly woman crossing the road. By then, we were in good spirits. It was one of those beautiful English summer evenings when the light lingers forever. We headed out laughing, not taking any of it too seriously. We spent a while sitting in a patch of woods, talking rubbish, listening to the quiet, half enjoying the silliness of it all. A few hours later, we decided to make our way back to the campsite. But just before leaving, we spotted a gravel track leading off the main road and thought, why not take one last look? There was still a faint glow in the sky, but under the trees it was properly dark. That's when I noticed it. Up ahead, maybe 20 yards away, I saw what I can only describe as a pale, white shape, almost like a narrow, human-sized column of mist. Not solid, not exactly floating, but there. What was strange was that I didn't feel frightened at first. I honestly thought there must be something smeared on my contact lens. I blinked hard a few times, even rubbed at my eye, but the shape stayed exactly where it was. I said, "Malik, can you see that?" He was looking off in another direction and just said, "See what?" I turned back and it was gone. So we kept walking. Then, a moment later, I saw it again. This time, it was closer to the path, moving at a slant, almost as if it was about to cross in front of us. Again, I tried to reason it away. Dirt on the lens, a trick of the light, low mist, anything sensible. And then Malik suddenly yelled, "What the hell is that?" That was the moment my stomach dropped, because now I knew it wasn't just in my head. I grabbed the huge torch we'd brought with us and switched it on, but he immediately shouted, "Turn it off! Turn it off!" So I did, and that made everything worse. For a few seconds we were blind, completely blind. The torch had wiped out what little night vision we had, and by then the last bit of light had disappeared from the sky. We were swallowed by darkness so thick it felt like it had weight. I remember standing there, barely breathing, listening to Malik breathing hard beside me. Eventually, our eyes adjusted, and somehow, reluctantly, I agreed. We carried on up the hill until we came across 3 people, a man and 2 women, very much real and very much alive. We told them what we'd just seen and asked what on earth they were doing out there at that time of night. They said they were paranormal investigators. Apparently the area had quite a reputation, and they were there to do some sort of vigil. I remember thinking they seemed serious to the point of being unsettling. They were doing little rituals, talking about energies and cleansing the space. We left them to it and started the long walk back to our campsite, which was a couple of miles away. Every dark patch of trees, every rustle, every shadow had us on edge after that. But nothing else happened on the way back. There were a few odd things that happened to Malik later that night too, but I slept through all of that, and honestly, this part is the piece that has stayed with me anyway. So what was it? I still don't know. I come from a scientific background, so of course I've tried to explain it. Maybe it was marsh mist. Maybe it was some strange trick of temperature and low light and imagination. Maybe it just happened to form a shape that looked almost human. Twice. But I can tell you this honestly. Whatever it was, in that moment, I was truly scared. And for someone as skeptical as me, that's what has never quite left me. If you're listening to this, I want you to picture me as a young mother back in 1999, living in a 2-bedroom apartment with my husband and our little boy, Tobin. He was about 3 then. We'd already been there a couple of years, but that apartment always felt wrong somehow. Heavy, unfriendly. Like the air itself was carrying something I couldn't explain. Not long before all of this began, my husband left and asked for a divorce. Looking back, I've always felt like moving into that apartment was the start of everything falling apart for us. After he left, I started noticing this awful feeling that I was never really alone. Even when my son wasn't home, it felt like someone was there with me. I'd catch myself saying, "Hello?" into the silence, like an idiot, half joking and half hoping I was wrong. Sometimes I'd get chills so suddenly they made me stop in place. At first I told myself it was grief, stress, loneliness. You know how badly the mind wants to explain things away. Then, it started happening with my son. Like a lot of toddlers, he hated naps. One afternoon I laid him down and he was fussing and fighting sleep the way little kids do. I left his bedroom door cracked and went into the living room, still hearing him complain. And then all at once, he went completely quiet. Not sleepy quiet, abrupt quiet. So I peeked in. He was lying on his side, smiling at the empty space beside his bed, like someone was standing there keeping him company. I remember backing out of the room and thinking, well, at least he's calm now. A few days later it happened again. This time, I heard whispering, then a little giggle. I looked in, and once again he was staring at that same spot beside the bed. After his nap, I asked him, real casual, "Who were you talking to in there, baby?" And he told me, plain as anything, "The nice lady." I still remember the chill that ran up the back of my neck. I asked him who she was, and he said she sang to him, told him stories, kept him company. I wanted so badly to believe it was just an imaginary friend. Kids do that. Kids say strange things. That's the sort of flimsy little logic adults cling to when they don't want to admit they're scared. But it kept happening. I'd hear him whispering in his room, sometimes even late at night. Every time I checked, he'd be looking toward that same empty place. About a year passed. I met someone new, and eventually my boyfriend, Frank, moved in with us. By then, Tobin was around 4.5. Not long after moving in, Frank started telling me the apartment felt wrong to him too. He said he always felt watched, especially when he was there alone. I told him I knew exactly what he meant. I still hadn't told him about the nice lady. I think part of me was embarrassed to say it out loud. Part of me was afraid that once I did, it would become more real. Then one day, something happened that shook both of us. I was still at work, and I hadn't picked my son up from daycare yet, so Frank was alone in the apartment, taking a shower. When I got home, I found him outside on the steps in nothing but a pair of soaked shorts, dripping wet, wide-eyed, scared half out of his skin. I asked him what happened. He told me he'd been in the shower when he saw, through the frosted glass, what he thought was me walking into the bathroom. He called out, cheerful as anything, asking how my day had gone. No answer. Then he saw her again, or what he thought was me, leaning over the sink and staring into the mirror. He said my name. Still nothing. He rinsed the soap out of his hair, grabbed the first thing he could throw on, and ran outside. Not long after that, I found out I was pregnant. The whispering in Tobin's room never really stopped. Frank and I still felt watched all the time. Then, A few months later, I was talking with a neighbor who had lived in the complex for years. She was in the apartment upstairs from mine, sort of across the way. Somehow, we got to talking about drugs and the people in town who'd lost themselves to meth. Small town tragedy. There's always too much of it. That's when she told me about the woman who had lived in my apartment right before my ex-husband and I moved in. She said the woman had moved there after a divorce with her 2 young sons. At first, she had a good office job downtown. She dressed beautifully, went to work every day, held her life together. Then she got involved with a man who was using meth, and before long, she was using too. My neighbor said she watched her unravel over the next year. The nice clothes disappeared. The job disappeared. Her whole life started to collapse. Eventually, her ex-husband fought for custody of the boys and won. After the children were gone, things got even worse. Then one day, she overdosed in that apartment. My neighbor saw the paramedics take her out. She was seizing, foaming at the mouth. The man she'd been with apparently stole from the apartment while she was dying, though he did call 911 before he left. She never came back. She died. Later, her parents came to clear the place out. By the time my neighbor finished telling me all of that, I was crying. She probably thought it was just pregnancy hormones and a sad story. But that wasn't it. Because the second she told me about that woman and her 2 boys, I knew. I knew in that deep, wordless way you sometimes know things before your mind catches up. I felt it in my bones. I knew who the nice lady was. Later, my second son, Colin, was born, and we stayed in that apartment until he was around 7 months old. In the last couple of months we lived there, something started happening with him too. He'd fuss in his crib, upset and restless, and then suddenly, he'd go quiet. A moment later, we'd hear little baby coos, tiny giggles, that happy, soft sound babies make when they feel safe. By then, strangely enough, I wasn't frightened anymore. A couple of times, I even found myself whispering into the room, "Thank you." Because whatever had happened to that woman in life, whatever pain had kept her there, she was gentle with my boys. She sang to them. She soothed them. She gave comfort where maybe she had once lost all comfort herself. And I still can't get over the strange echo of it all. She had lived there with 2 sons after a broken marriage. Then, years later, I ended up in that same apartment with 1 little boy, and then gave birth to a second. The parallels were almost too much to ignore. Years later, I was looking through old baby pictures of my sons and found one taken in that apartment. My older son is holding his baby brother, and above them, there's this gray orb I'd never really noticed before. I looked it up, and one interpretation said gray orbs can be connected to spirits carrying sadness or unrest. That brought the tears right back, because all I could think was, there she is, the nice lady. I still live near that apartment complex. Every now and then, I drive past it, and when I do, I say a prayer for her. I hope she isn't there anymore. I hope whatever kept her tied to that place finally let go. I hope she found peace. And more than anything, I hope that wherever she is now, she's no longer grieving, no longer trapped, no longer reaching for the life she lost.